Yeah. Alderman Wilson.
Here.
Alderman Holmes.
Here.
Alderman Tindem.
Here.
Alderman Grover.
Here.
Alderman Rainey.
Here.
Alderman Burris.
Here.
Alderman Fisk.
Here.
7-0. 7-0.
We have a quorum. City manager, do you have a few comments?
I do. Madam Mayor, members of the council, good evening. Two items for you before we get started. First, you may have heard there's a football game here in Evanston on Saturday. We're playing a school from the state of Ohio. In addition to the game, we are also going to have a visit from a television program called College Game Day on ESPN. That is a 3-hour pregame show that starts at 8 a.m. Central Time, goes till 11 a.m. Central Time, and that will also be here. It's also homecoming weekend. ESPN's morning radio program will originate here on Friday, so it's going to be a busy weekend. Chief Eddington has been in touch with our friends and colleagues down the street, and we're working closely with them on all aspects of what will be a very busy day in Evanston. Chief, do you want to share what we're doing and what we know at this point?
Yes, I'd be happy to share some highlights. So, good evening. This is Mayor Alderman, City Clerk, City Manager. This will be a quick overview of our efforts, and we're coordinating extensively with NU and NUPD. This is not the first time that Ohio State's come to town. We anticipate large crowds. The nuance to this one is because of both teams being undefeated. There's a little more media attention with ESPN Game Day, and for those of you who are not rabid football fans, this is a big deal. This is a huge logistical effort by ABC and ESPN. It takes about 10 semi-tractor trailers of stuff to get this show on for 3 hours. So we're working closely with Chief Lewis. He has committed to a significant upgrade in staffing, approximately 58 police officers from 4 a.m. Saturday morning until 4 a.m. Sunday morning, because this will be almost a 24-hour event. EPD has also reflected that staffing, and we are rolling our specialized units into patrol function for that 24-hour period. As you know, the TV show will end at 11, kickoff's not until 7. That's a lot of time for fans. We'll have a heavy presence in the downtown and in the neighborhoods pregame. Also, as usual, there's a Tuesday morning football meeting that will be attended by Alderman Grover along with representatives of NU, NUPD, and EPD to discuss the logistics that go into this.
Excuse me, Chief, could we put in a request for more porta potties?
It has been done already, and we will follow up tomorrow with you.
Thank you.
And also, we're keen on pointing out to you the anticipated paths of travel of the vans, because that's where they'll do the most good and prevent problems in the neighborhood. So we'll cluster them, we'll attempt to cluster them around the parking lots and other places where people will be moving to and from. And we realize that's a significant issue for the neighborhoods, and it's a balancing act. There's a downside to having a porta potty close to your property. There's also an upside to having a porta potty close to your property. So we will work through those things beginning tomorrow morning, or more formally tomorrow morning. There will be several follow-on meetings as needed for both NUPD, EPD, and the athletic department of NU. But at the manager's behest, I'm here tonight to assure you and the community that plans are in progress to anticipate this event. It should be a fun time for all, a little crowded but fun. Also, I don't want to leave out on this busy weekend, it's also Evanston Township's homecoming. So we have both events occurring simultaneously. We'll have the Friday night football game for ETHS. We'll have the homecoming parade for NU. Saturday night we'll have the football game for NU and the dance for ETHS. So it will be a busy weekend. Are there any questions that I can answer? Yes,
Are you gonna have super coverage around Maple and Garfield and Firewood Park?
The issues over this?
Oh,
Yes,
Well, I
we
don't
appreciate
know if they thought they
what
had-
is going to occur. We appreciate that we need to be there. This is one of the times where we rotate the whole problem-solving team into that neighborhood to deal with the parties and other activities. Yes,
Blumenberg was very good, whenever it was that couple of weeks.
yes, yeah, he's familiar with that area, work that, and he's bringing his whole unit to address that issue along with Sergeant Collier and Commander Pickett will be there for this. Yes, sir.
What's the theme of homecoming?
Yeah, no, too long.
Well, the only reason why I'm asking is that on some downtown windows, it says, "This is our block." And I'm a little concerned about some people taking an issue with, "No, it's not your block."
I have no idea. I'll ask tomorrow at the Tuesday meeting and see
Okay.
what.
Let me see if I can.
It's basically stay out of our hood sort of thing. It's a little troubling.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Chief. Can you confirm where the location of college game day will be? Where will the stage be?
The last I heard when I spoke with Chief Lewis this morning, it was going to be on the lakefront. Now, the Mike and Mike radio show will be here in Beverly. As we talk right now, I don't know what logistical support Mike and Mike need for that.
Mike and Mike are Friday?
Yes.
Right.
The homecoming theme is Cats on the Block.
Yeah, okay.
Madam Mayor, unless there's any other questions, a couple other items regarding the weekend. We will have extended hours at 311. So that if residents have questions or concerns about really anything that's going on over the weekend, they should call 311. We'll also have folks from the city management staff with Chief Eddington at NU's command post throughout. So if anything else goes bump, we'll be ready to respond as quickly as we can. The other item I wish to raise is a sad one, in that Matt Swinkowski, our intergovernmental affairs coordinator, is leaving the city. His last day is on Friday. We will miss Matt very much. I know many of you have worked very closely with Matt over the last several years. He created a job that didn't exist when he arrived here in Evanston, working with the staff of our legislators, coordinating Evanston, Dane, Springfield, working closely with the staff of the CTA and Metra. Certainly we've made tremendous groundwork with all those agencies, probably capped off by the building of the viaducts, and how it really didn't cause the whole community to grind to a halt. It was smooth, and through Matt's negotiations with Jewel, especially to get that viaduct built on the Jewel parking lot versus in the middle of the street, I think it certainly was very good. So Matt, we're going to miss you and wish you all the best as you move on in your future. So, Madam Mayor, the business for this evening is to continue the discussion regarding strategic planning and the council's 6 goals. What we thought would make sense would be to try to tackle 3 of them this evening, which are around infrastructure, and then tackle the remaining 3 at an additional meeting the first part of November. Gene Bonander has come back to join us to help walk through sort of the strategies behind some of the goals. We also have the Public Works and Utilities Department here this evening to make a presentation to kind of give you some background. Gene, I don't know if you have any preliminary comments you'd like to make, or if we should just get into the presentation. So we'll do...
We do have citizens.
Oh, I'm sorry.
On,
I apologize.
On the agenda. So, having no sheets for anyone to sign up, does anyone want to speak? They don't have to sign up now.
You're up.
Oh, the sheets are out there?
Yes.
Did anyone sign up?
Yeah.
Oh. Go right ahead. Could you go over, I think, are we recording this?
It's in the
Thank
area
you.
by,
If you, can you
it's
pick-
in the area by Madam Mayor, so it'll pick up all the
You're
sound.
okay.
I'll point it this way.
Go right ahead.
Good evening, Alderman and Mayor.
I'm Ellen Alexander, and I'm here tonight on behalf of No Park Sale, a group that you're familiar with, I think. And you know especially, and this is a short statement, but a fervent statement. As you know, our position has consistently been and remains that the lakefront should remain open and available for recreation, community, educational, and cultural benefit for all Evanston residents, and that no lakefront or parkland should be used for profit development and private profit. We have fervently and consistently reminded you, our elected representatives, that development and use of our public lakefront must conform to current zoning ordinance and lakefront and comprehensive master plans. We urge you tonight, while you are setting goals for the coming year, and in great respect for your duties and your responsibilities, that you consider and get ready to pass a lakefront protection ordinance that will protect our lakefront from any private development, so that in the future, ideas such as selling 2.5 acres of property for a for-profit hotel or selling our beachfront for a parking garage can never be considered, or at least would be open to public process for all citizens. We believe the citizens of Evanston have spoken to you with their petition, with their yard signs, with their presence here. We urge you, as you consider the future of the city, to take this important step. Thank you very much for the group.
Thank you. Mr. Miskey?
If you'd like, be careful of the cords.
Well, I was thinking back about, as you were talking about Northwestern playing. Northwestern improved quite a bit. 40 years ago, I watched them play the University of Michigan. At the end of the first quarter, Michigan had run the score up 25 points, and they dumped the entire bench on the field to play Northwestern. But it seems like Northwestern improves, and Northwestern improved a lot. It's sort of interesting. I hope it doesn't take us 40 years to improve our capital planning and what we do here, because I think we're probably at where Northwestern was when I watched that game. Tonight you're going to talk about 3 items on facilities, and I think these items, and I look through your data here and everything, and there's really nothing that tells us how big the problem is. So I believe it dwarfs the pensions quite dramatically. One council member suggested they were more concerned than anybody else about the pensions, but I think you all should be very concerned about what's going on here with this capital, because I think it's well into the hundreds of millions of dollars, but it's not really shown tonight in any of the literature what's really going on. I also gave every alderman here a FOIA I filed. Basically, you can read, you don't have to read it very detailed. I circled up what I said in the FOIA. The bottom line is I keep on telling you, how do you run a business, a water business that you don't even know that makes, you don't even understand its profitability. You can't even tell me the expense for each customer. That's in the FOIA here. So it's absurd to me that anyone would want to pretend they're running a business that's going to make money, that really is driving a capital program and spending money and charging ratepayers money when they don't know what they're doing. I think that's really of great concern to me. Really, there's another issue here that, and I spoke about it, there seems to be a lot of lack of accountability for capital. When I recently questioned cash flow, someone just got up and said, well, we're going to spend $2 million more. Well, really, where's your cash flow projections for the years? I mean, somebody should have told me at that meeting how much they were going to really spend for the rest of the year and what they were going to do. Assuming there's more projects, you'll spend more, but I don't really think people have an understanding here about how to run a project. And really, I feel there's really a strong lack of accountability on staff on some of these things to really be held to any kind of standards of accountability when they run a project. And I feel capital is somewhat neglected because it took us almost a year to hire our current engineer in charge of the department. And I think there's some other interesting issues, and people are trying to allude more to Harley Clark than anything else, but to me, Harley Clark is really a real example of really a lack of planning. It really represents not really having any kind of scope of work and just running off and doing something, just creating a list of facilities that don't work, and you have no idea what these facilities do or how the community uses them or anything, and then you're pretending you're going to sell them. And now we're in a mess because we don't know what's even going on with the facility. So it's really rather tragic. Really, it's wasting a lot of money, it's wasting staff's time, and it's quite a mess here. So I think council members need to think of a much bigger picture here of facilities and accountability and running this thing. So, thank you.
Thank you. That concludes public comments. So, city manager, did you want to have someone from the staff discuss city facilities and walk us through this? Or?
Ms. Robinson and her staff are here, and we'll go through the PowerPoint presentation at this point.
If anybody wants to eat pizza, there's plenty for everybody, so please. It's delicious. Well, I could speak in favor of half brown, that's excellent.
Did everybody hear that? There's pizza available, if anyone wants anything.
There's good pizza available. And salad.
And salad. And
Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Council, City Clerk, and City Manager, Suzette Robinson, Director of Public Works. Our presentation today will be split up into three sections. We'll talk about homeowning police and the city engineer. We'll discuss facilities. Second, remainder will discuss the parks, and I will come back and kind of give you where we are with streets, sidewalks, and alleys as a follow-up. I think what we're asking for you to do today, we want to give you some historical information on kind of what the spending patterns and priorities have been. And most of this is really food for thought to help you come up with what our priorities should be for the future. We will be asking at some point, as a part of the budget process, approval for the 2014 expenditures that we're asking for. And we're hoping that you will take this information and give us more guidance financially and from a community standards standpoint to develop a CIP that will take us for the next 4 or 5 years. A lot of the information that we provide you, and even some of the recommendations, I mean, we are in dire straits as it relates to the street conditioning, and then we want to get more detailed information, and that's what we're requesting to an update to the park study that was done in 2000. So we want to go back and upgrade that to also give you that information, and then as well as we're focusing on some of the facilities and the splitting up of things. Nothing happens in a vacuum. So what happens as a result when we shift money one place, you know, time still goes on. So the facilities get older, the streets get older. So we really have to think about how we're going to fund it and what the community standards are, and then what the priorities are to get it done. So we can figure out how to improve everything overall. So having said that, I'm going to have Homayoun come forward and talk to you about the facilities.
Madam Mayor, Member of City
Can you speak up?
Homayoun Hughes, Assistant Director of Public Works. So my portion of the presentation has to do with the facilities, and for the purpose of tonight, we decided to present a history of what we've done in the years 2009 through 2013 this year in 4 categories: civic center, other city facilities, which are fire and police headquarters, and service center and fire stations. We have another category, community facilities, and then Lakefront facilities. With that background, then we'll talk a little bit about 2014, which is around the corner, and this is probably about the time we should to start firming up a plan to begin work and complete the projects that we need to complete in 2014. And following that, we'll talk about where you want to go from starting 2015 and beyond, and talk about the long-range plan that we need to develop, hopefully beginning tonight, and then again, that will be, of course, it will take time to do that. I'm not going to read every category that's shown here. I will answer any question that you might have. For the Civic Center between 2009 and 2013, including, again, by the end of the year, we will have an expenditure of $3.29 million. Now, every time we have a major roof project, repair or maintenance, that typically is a large expenditure. And we see that in here in respect to this particular category and building. We can move on to the next slide. For the other city facilities, we have the service center, police fire, and again the fire station, same thing. Starting from 2009 through 2013, we will have an expenditure of $5.2 million for the improvements made at those facilities. Yes, ma'am.
Has the, I'm not sure, are these expenditures already made? They've already been made?
These are the expenditures that we made from 2009
Okay.
through 12, and the 13 we're finishing up. So some of
Alright.
these expenditures are still, yes.
But the money has already been spent.
Yes.
The work might not have been completed, but the money has
There
been.
may be a few dollars here and there that need to be paid to the contractors as they finish their
Alright,
work. But
okay,
yes.
just check.
So this, you just explained, this is what it's been spent. At a later date, I know it's not in the slides, are you going to go through these facilities and with an estimate of what still needs to be spent? Because clearly, the majority of this is, what we're doing in these facilities is patchwork.
And Alderman, we're very concerned about that, and I think at the end of Suzette's presentation,
Right.
we'll talk about what we think we need to do is more planning, that we don't have good estimates for most of the facilities, and rather than continue this patchwork, our words too, of this, that we're proposing that the council instead look at this more in a big picture perspective, give us some direction as to what priorities there are, if you have priorities, and then we would look at this in a much more holistic way. But we don't have good estimates that we feel comfortable reviewing with you tonight because they don't exist.
Okay, yeah, and I think that's the bigger concern is not what's happened, what we spent, but really what we need to spend, which is substantial. So, thanks.
And I'm not spending too much time.
I know, I appreciate, just want to make sure.
Our community centers, we're showing 6 different facilities. Again, we show $2.04 million expenditure, and again, the bulk of this expense is the roof that's being currently constructed at Noise. Lakefront facilities, another 5 sites and 5 projects shown here. In respect to Alderman Brady's question, 4 of those projects are completed. One of them, which is Lakefront, lagoon renovation. It has been designed, but it's not built, and that's the future project. So this is a slide that we would like you to notice probably more than even the previous one, and that shows how we spend our funds in the last 5 years on the facilities. What percentage of it went to, again, starting at 12 o'clock going clockwise, 24% of the funds was spent at the city center. 37% was spent on police, fire, and service center. 15% of the funds were spent at the community center, and 25% at Lakefront. When we add them up, it's 101%. And the reason for that is because these numbers were rounded. So, yes.
Could you remind me what the $32,000 for the Harley Clark Mansion was?
That was done, it was some minor roof repairs and also a study that was done in 2012. So again, that gives us a feel for how we invested in our facilities in the last few years. Now moving forward to the 2014 projects, again, there are a list of 16 projects and sites shown on this spreadsheet. So again, 2014 is around the corner, so we need to have a discussion about completing some of the projects that either started in 2013 or we need to begin early in 2014 and move forward. And there are 3 columns here that shows that show how the funding will be spent. For example, the first column from the left is the project name. Second column shows the general obligation bonds. Those are the new monies that we will ask for your approval in the coming months and probably next year to approve for the projects. That's $2.2 million. Carry over is are the funds from 2013 that again they were appropriate for the projects, but they were not spent on the projects. But again, we need to carry them over to complete what we have started. And then the fourth column, which are other sources, those are the grants and donations, in short. And that adds up to almost $1.3 million for a total of $4.5 million. I did a rough estimate of how we have been spending money on our facilities, and in the past it seems like we've been spending on the average of $2.6, $2.7 million, and which is pretty close to what we have in here. Again, $4.5 million include the donation and grant, but take that aside, the city's investment is still about the same as what we have spent in the past few years. So, again, moving forward, this chart.
Do you know, excuse me, Ryan, do you know how much other cities of our size typically spend?
That's a very tough question because not every cities have the same number of facilities as we have. Again, the city that I used to work for didn't have as many facilities as the city of Evanston does. And we had a lot more roads, but a lot less facilities. So it would be it can be done, but we need to do a lot, some research to figure out how we can compare it.
Well, never mind comparing. Do you know what best practices would say what amount we should be spending for the facilities that we have?
For the number of facilities that we have and the amount of work that they are needed, we probably will need a little more funds. Yes,
But an order of magnitude is probably 2 to 3 times of what we've been spending is what we should spend. I think one of the challenges is that if you look at the sheer number of facilities that we have for a city under 100,000, I would say we're probably close to double the number of facilities that other cities, Hamilton came from a city, we generally like to compare ourselves to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and they don't have a fraction of the city facilities that we have. So I think one of our challenges is if we're spending 2 to 3 times less on just general maintenance, plus we have perhaps twice as many as a community our size, that adds up.
What is the population of Ann Arbor?
$114,000. No, 114,000 people.
Okay, so not double us, but
That's,
a substantially larger.
6,000 versus,
And they probably have, what, half the facilities or 3/4 of facilities?
a lot less. I would say probably 4 or 5 facilities, which are mostly for operations, like our civic center and fire and police.
How many fire stations do they have?
That's
On
good to
the
know.
fire station, I believe they have 4, and then they started sharing with the neighboring communities and the villages.
So that's a key issue. It's a key issue.
Humayun, does the 114 that you said, does that include the student population?
Yes, it does.
And how big is the University of Michigan, 47,000?
Last time I checked, it was about 45,000.
It's to provide fire for them.
No, I just,
And residents and
I've always heard it. I'm sorry, Suzette, you were saying, do they have a separate park
If they had a
district?
separate park district, it was at included in the number.
Do they?
Well, they have lots of parks, and it is included in the facility, but when I said facilities, I meant buildings.
But there is no park district. It's a department of the city.
It's the Parks Department is a department of the city.
Keep going.
So, again, when we look back in a 6 year, it's a good period for having a capital improvement plan. If we look at the 6 years, including 2014, again, these are the numbers. We see 19% of the funds spent at Civic Center, 35% on the fire, police, and service center, about 15% on community buildings, and 30% on the lake fund, for a total of $18.52 million. So this is now the big question for all of us, and again, we can provide you and in the future as we move forward with more information and data as we speak about the future plans. But this is just about the right time to start talking and thinking about what we want to do starting from 2015 and beyond. And again, just to start the conversation, I think we need to also stop and look at what we have, do a little bit more study on some of the facilities that we don't have enough information on. For example, item number 1, investment in existing community centers. Again, the question is, in the past, we've spent about 50% of our funds on the community center. Is that the right number? Is that how we want to continue in the future? There are 3 facilities, again, shown here. Chandler, Fleetwood, and Libya. I happen to go and see all of them. And again, they are, there's certainly room for making improvements there. Some of them are needed sooner than later. And definitely it's time to do a closer look at everything and anything that needs to be done in those facilities. Maybe not do them all in 1 year or the next 3 years, but again, we need to know what is it that we're up against and we have to handle in the future years. Hardy Clark mentioned, we have talked about that, I guess, pretty often. Again, the question would be for you and the community to help us out with a plan that would make the site again to a condition that would be acceptable to the city of Evanston. Robert Brown, again, that's a building that certainly requires some work. I understand there's been some conversation about having a public-private partnership for that facility, and that still continues. And I believe there will be some reports coming in the future and explain what the findings have been. I'm not personally familiar with all the details on that one yet, but I'm ready.
Well, before you move on, Marty Lyons has been quarterbacking that for us, and he's coming in. Marty, can you just give a brief what's the time frame for the Crown project to be back before the council?
It's going to the committee the week of the 7th, so next week, and then based on direction from the committee of 3 members, 3 aldermen and 3 citizens on various boards, we'll move forward from there. It will be in enough of a condition that we'll be able to come forward with recommendation on options. So how do we proceed with full-blown replacement or any other options?
So hopefully as soon as the 28th of October, assuming that the committee is satisfied with what
I think
they have.
November, bringing it forward with the rest of the budget will be at the same time, but we could have it on the 28th, right after we went around to do the Capitol tour on the 26th.
Again, one of the first things that I heard when I came to the city of Evanston was a conversation about skate park. So again, the question that we will have for you is whether we have the direction to move forward with that project, and if so, where would we want to have this facility located? The cycling center, I understand it is not operating. It's basically a building shell that is used as storage, maybe temporarily. So again, you see a lot of question marks there because that's the beginning of the conversation. Yes, ma'am.
Homi-Yoon, I think if we looked at the numbers, we would find that it is not a temporary storage facility, that has actually been used for storage longer than it was a recycling center, I believe. So, you know, I mean, that's a fact. It is serving a very important purpose for us ever since our storage facility, I think on Jackson or Ashley, yeah, since we lost that. So it's serving a purpose. It is not a superfluous building at this point, although it does require some attention.
Well, the next question that we need to ask is if we do find another location to store what we're storing that building, do we want to make, you know, any other plans for this particular?
Well, as soon as you find another facility to store our stuff in, let me know, because I don't think that's happening too soon.
But clearly, Madam Mayor, members of the council, this has been an issue before you, which, you know, at some point you may wish to give us direction. We don't want to not bring it up as far as you're looking at all of your capital issues. Certainly the future of this building is one of them.
But I think, City Manager, to discount the importance of having a place to put all this stuff is not taking the building very seriously. It has served a very important purpose. Do you disagree with that? I mean, we have no place to put this stuff.
But I also think that this is a valuable piece of property, and at some point the council may wish to revisit the issue. And we don't, it's not our role to presuppose what the council may or may not want to do.
Well, I'm a member of the council, just to remind you. And it's in my work. So
Understood.
that's what
And last but not least is to look for partners. Again, there are, we have Northwestern in town, we have Evanston Township High School, we have the District 65, and there might be others out there that we could partner with and again, provide our community and public a better service and perhaps a more efficient way. Sorry for being rusty, I haven't done this for 7, 8 months, so I'm warming up.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Stephanie Levine with the Public Works Department. I'm going to talk about tarp system. I've got a pretty brief presentation. Similar to how I'm going to cover 3 things. Summary of what we've been doing over the past 5 years. Talk a little bit about what we're proposing presently for your consideration and discussion for 2014. And then talk a little bit about what we want to start, hopefully, the discussion about looking at for 2015 and beyond. So this slide is a summary of our capital investments over the past 5 years in the park system. The total is just under $900,000 spread across these 5 projects here: Rumble Richmond, James Park, Queens Park, Fireman's Park, and Ladder. For 2014, we've got 6 things that we're currently bringing forth for your consideration. Some work scope to be defined at Baker Park, we also want to start looking at Mountain Square, not just the park, but doing a traffic study, we're looking at the entire operation of that core area of the downtown, looking at the opportunities there. It's a great park, and also trying to tie in renovations there, not just to serve the users of the facilities, a very unusual population that gets served there, but also look at tying it into the Main Street corridor and some of the future streetscape improvements that we're proposing there. Take a look at, sorry. Take a look at Land Arboretum, at the bike path. We've got some federal funding lined up for that, so we're looking at doing our engineering so that we can actually do construction of that project in 2015. And then I'm going to come back to this, but we're going to look at doing a needs assessment and evaluation to update what was done in 2000. Suzette mentioned, and I'll come back to that. And then also kind of continue on with our look at Penny Park and try to really work through design, work with the community, and do a really unique community build project with that location.
Can we go back and where is the actual construction of the park in terms of a priority? So you design in 2014, and do you build in 2015?
That's the thought.
Okay. Thank you.
But I'm gonna have that as we will line up just like we do with every other project that we have for 2015, and then the city council will decide the priorities first. So you tell us, we tell you what the staff proposal will be, and that will be one of them. But we also will have the facilities evaluations that we're doing in 2014. So we hope to give you all the data that you have, and then just like we do with every CFP project, you vote to tell us what the priorities are in the plan. So it will be one of the listed projects for 2015.
Yeah, but to be clear, we don't know what the engineering reports are going to produce. So, I mean, anything could come from any of these engineering reports that will either delay it or speed it up or whatever.
Yes, and we only have a set amount of money. So what I'm saying is we're going to come with you with a list of projects, and so in order to accomplish, if you decide we want to try to accomplish all those things, it may result in issuing more bonds to finance things, or there'll just be a variety of options. So when we look at one of the reasons why we're studying Levy Center, for example, we have some structural issues there, so which is a concern for us. So we want to do an evaluation, even though that's a fairly new, or one of the newer recreation community centers, and so. We just want you to have more data so that we're making good decisions. So we want to give you all of that and then give direction. And I mean, that's really what we're trying to accomplish in this whole strategic thought process. Right now, what we're doing is we come to you either with grants ahead of time saying this should be a project, because this should be a priority because we have a grant for it. And so then that's where the focus goes. But sometimes we don't always connect the dots. So what happens is when you say, oh, sure, and then we have already committed, say, $500,000 of CIP for the upcoming year, without knowing what all the priorities are. So we want to give you all the priorities ahead of time so that you're not kind of making a decision in a vacuum. So you'll have everything. So we're trying to give you the total picture because, when you tip the pendulum one way, it does have an effect on the other side. So. Okay, so future focus, we've got kind of three things that we're thinking about pushing for. I mentioned before, Suzette needs assessment and evaluation. In 2000, we did a strategic plan for the park system. It was very helpful in designing a long-term strategy. It's been 14 years, so we want to step back, take another look, and see if we can assess what's going on, prepare ourselves to national standards, and come up with a strategy to move forward. We also want to look at partnership opportunities. That's something I think Colleen mentioned as well, with schools, and maybe looking at new techniques, open streets concepts, things that are non-traditional open spaces for public activity.
I just wanted you to talk a little bit about the partnerships with the schools. I had a conversation with the city manager, and I thought that was an excellent idea. If you could just give us a sentence or two on what you're thinking.
Well, I think the partnerships with the schools, I think we've struggled, Mr. Gaynor struggled for a number of years trying to get the schools to have a mix of facilities that would be made available to us. Some facilities are available, some aren't available, then there's the costs associated with them. And what we think makes sense, especially from a park perspective, is to try to identify those park facilities, those field facilities within school grounds, not all of them, but perhaps a handful are the most important, and then work with the school district to see what additional use we can have. There's not new space to buy for park space. There's not a place in Evanston that we're going to be able to purchase for a new James Park. But when you look at some of these school fields, some of them are good sized. And if we had more regular access to them, I think that would make sense for us. But I'm sure the school districts are going to want a partnership that includes a commitment of dollars for maintenance, for improvement, for supervision, for security. And rather than just sort of talk about this, which I think is we've done a good job of over the last several years, try to hammer out an agreement that makes sense, because that will then give us those spaces quickly. We'll be able to put them into use. As I've been talking to Mr. McCrae and Mr. Dornicker about the future of how we focus more on programs in the Parks, Recreation, Community Services Department. Having more facilities is key, but we can't afford to build them ourselves. So those partnerships, and I think the schools are the most interesting. You know, the open streets concept. There was an event that was held this summer at Dempster and Chicago, which I think was very well received. The question is, should we do more of that? It was a one-off event. Can we program those more? Streets are nice big places, and to make them more available for activity, I think is something that we don't have a plan for, and I think would make sense for us to come up with plans as we move forward.
Like the Ridge was phenomenal. Yeah. Congratulations.
The last item is just fundraising. That's something we look to now as well, but trying to hopefully find new opportunities. Working with community groups, private organizations, and continuing on the grants. I have the last portion of the summary, and I'm going to cover streets. You saw this graph when we talked about the 2014 street resurfacing. This is basically the percentage of roads by ward, along with the primary routes, which belongs to all the city. That's kind of how we classify things. The next slide shows you where we resurfaced. So the percentage of the roads how we resurface the roads, and the criteria that we use to select those. And you will see the percentages are fairly close. And okay, so we're going to talk about the service conditions of the remaining roads. I basically cut off the number of roads at 65, which 60% is considered fair. And as we progress through this, you'll see how many roads we have that are in very poor condition. And the reason why I stopped at 60% fair, because 5 years from now, those that are in fair will be in very poor condition. So trying to achieve fair, we had to actually pull some of those out as well. So as you can see from our primary roads, 13.5% are very poor, and 19.2% are poor, and the next group is also poor. So we have about 43% of the roads that are in poor condition, plus 13% that are in very poor condition.
Are none in good condition?
Yes, yes, we have some of them resurfaced.
There are. So there's that fifth category of good or excellent.
Yes, but I'm really focusing on what we need to fix.
All right,
So
right.
here we actually have all of the data that, because we did the IMS, the 5-year plan, so we have had a street evaluation, so I'm just, but you're absolutely right. There is another side to this story, but this is $32 million worth of bad. So then we also, I went through, and this next slide shows, in addition to the primary routes by ward, this is the very poor. And as you can see, Chico has a substantial piece of that in the very poor, as well as 4 and 9. And the next slide shows this is the poor condition. And 7 has a good chunk of that. 9 shows up again as well as 6.
Suzette, does this include the what's the category you call
The
it?
primary route?
Yes.
No, this is independent of the primary route. So all of the streets that are represented here are the residential streets. So these are the side streets and throughout the city. So if you've driven around, you probably have seen confirmation of some of this as well. And then 50 to 59%. You'll see kind of where that falls out as well. And then the last category is 60 to 65. So basically, so how we decide the streets that we're going to resurface, our current methodology that we use is we start with utility priorities because they're water mains and they have, which we'll hear about later, they have goals to replace a certain amount of water main each year, and they have funding for it. So our resurfacing portion of that is actually minor in terms of the CIP. So we actually plug in those streets. But there's collaboration in selecting those streets. But certainly that's our, I guess, the top priority that we look at. And there's been developmental priorities. If you recall, we had a 5-year plan and it took us 7 years to complete. And some of it has to do with, if there is like I want to pick Maple, but that was a TIF project. But if you have a development nearby, there may have been a need in order to attract more business, we decided that we upped the priority to resurface those streets. So that has kind of impacted the 5-year plan. And then what we talked about earlier, the impact of grant and TIF funding. So that when that's available, even if it's not the entire project, sometimes that increases the priority because we have that other money to leverage against the overall cost. Then we also try to put into everything that we do ward equity, meaning we try to do something in every ward each year to improve the conditions. And then the surface condition rating happens next. And then finally we look at citizen input and field review. So that's kind of the order we look at currently. So as a result of this, this is the resurfacing comparison. This is the pie chart that we showed before. That was the percentage of the city and then the percentage resurfaced. So as I kind of mentioned, they kind of line up. This is what we have done so far. So using that methodology, this is how things have ended up, which is pretty close to equal. So,
Director Evanston, in evaluating the conditions of our streets, is the date on the last time the street was resurfaced, is that relevant at all to understanding whether it's the street's turn to be resurfaced, or do you really just look at the condition of the street at any given time?
Well,
is that more reflective of whether it's the street's turn to be resurfaced rather than the last time it got attention?
No, it's because deterioration could happen depending on the type of traffic. It may happen very quicker on some streets than others. So the process that we use is we have the streets evaluated, all the streets evaluated every 5 years. The residential streets are typically evaluated every 10 years. This last 2 years, well, the last 2 evolutions, we actually did all the streets both times because I wanted to see kind of where we are, so that we had the residential rating, you know, and I think it should be in the cycle every time. Or it will result in the very poor streets. So when you just focus on the primary streets as the study, that tends to be all the data that we have, and so that's what was given, and that's how priorities are set. But it doesn't take into account the residential streets. So now that we have those data, that data for 2 evolutions, we've been able to kind of play some catch up, but we still have a lot of work to do. So, so basically for streets, in order to get everything up to a fair category by 2018, it would take $36 million. So, our current level is 1.4 million of MFT and 1.8 million of CLP. So we have $3.2 million each year, and that's not sufficient to get us to overall fair. And in fact, we are struggling, and typically from year to year we have somewhere between 10 to 15% of our streets that are in a very poor condition even after we get it done each year. So, so, and then this next slide just gives you a summary, area by area, going by the very poor at the top and how much it would cost to take care of each of those. That's the primary routes. So if we just went and said we were going to take care of all of the very poor streets, it would cost $4 million in addition to what we already have for 2015. So if we were going to say you can have $4 million more for street resurfacing, you're right. I can take care of all the very poor streets. So,
But not all at once.
well, I could if you gave me the money. I can make it
No. Yeah.
I don't think any of these streets are downtown, so.
Right, no. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so going on to the sidewalk program, we have 268 miles of sidewalk, and our current methodology for sidewalk replacement is 50-50. This results in us being able to replace 50,000 square feet annually. One of the things we can look at is increasing the residents' participation to 60% or 80%, and then that would result in us being able to replace more sidewalk.
Or conversely, shift the city's percentage.
Right.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, that would be, I think, a recommendation from staff right now, is what can we do to try to jumpstart additional investment in sidewalks. And we think that, you know, mixing the percentages, again, flop the resident and the city side, would probably make a lot of sense.
To incentivize all the renewable.
Incentivize means
So,
we've got
so
the
the
money for it.
Can we just clarify what Wally's saying? So the city would pick up 60% and resident 40%? Okay.
As an idea.
Yeah.
Can you explain, I see we have 268 miles of sidewalk. What is that in square footage?
What did you say?
Well, because we have two different units of
What
measurement.
was
We
the
have,
first part of your
How many
question?
well, we have 268 miles of sidewalk, and we have, we can do 50,000 square feet. And how many?
miles of sidewalk is that roughly? Of the 50,000?
The sidewalk is 5 feet wide.
Right.
So
5,280 feet per mile.
No, I know that, but I want to understand. What percentage we're
What
actually
percentage
doing?
of the 268?
I mean, is it like 4
Yes.
blocks?
That's a very good question.
Wally will have the answer in 1 second.
Right, yes, I know.
2 miles.
Yeah,
Wait, how many miles?
about 2 miles.
Of the
Almost 3.
268, okay. Geez, 1%.
Yeah.
And I have a follow-up though too. While you and I talked in the spring about doing an analysis of our sidewalks, and I've noticed as I've been walking that all of our sidewalks have marks on them now. And so I want to understand what the result is of that that analysis that I requested, I think we put an intern on it this summer, is that correct?
Is that the asphalt stuff?
The asphalt,
different.
we've been doing some evaluations. I don't know that we have any
I don't have the
final numbers.
Yeah, so we did a couple of pilots. I don't have any of that information.
Okay.
But I think Jim is working on a budget proposal as a response to that, which will result in renting some equipment to do some alternative.
Okay.
Alderman Groza?
Director Robinson, what restricts our ability to replace sidewalks? Is it the residents' willingness to undertake the cost of replacing their sidewalk, or is it our funding ability? Or is it both? And so I'm wondering, are we incentivizing by shifting more of the cost to residents, or are we just freeing up more funds from the city to be able to invest in sidewalks?
Yes, to the second part, we will be freeing up more money in terms of incentivizing. There are residents that have said, no way, no how. I don't care. I'm not going to participate. So one of the conversations that we had as a part of the sidewalk maintenance was, our program is voluntary. In other cities, it's not. So the 50-50 sidewalk program is mandatory. So once your sidewalk has been identified, you receive a letter from the village of Skokie in particular, and it says your sidewalk is going to be replaced, and here's how much it's going to cost, and they replace it, and they send you 50% of the bill. So that's the other thing that the city manager reverse flip may, if residents don't have to pay as much, they may be willing to participate.
Alderman Thurman.
Thank you. Is there a program for dealing with missing sidewalks? There are quite a few areas in the 6th Ward that there simply never was a sidewalk. And a lot of those places have been planted with older trees. I mean, are not probably going to work out, but there's very significant places that need something, like a sidewalk.
Yeah.
We have been looking at a couple of places in the 6th and 2nd Ward where either sidewalk was started on like 4 or 5 houses, and then the students walk into the high school or in the street.
Exactly.
So, we're going to be working with legal, and we are actually trying to work a program when there's no sidewalk. We have, in some cases, paid 100% of the cost.
First.
So
Right, the
we
first
have
one's
really
free.
good-
Because I think,
The first sidewalk's free.
Yes.
because if we impose some of these sidewalks, the people owning the property might be opposed to that, much less, asking them to pay for it. They might not really even want it in the first place. But, there are groups of neighbors that would like to see some of the sidewalks completed, especially accessing Central Business District and Willard School and places like that.
And I think Homeland has it on his schedule. I have been made aware, at least in the 2nd and 6th Ward, that we have to kind of talk about what opportunities. There's additional money for sidewalks that's being proposed in the budget for next year. And then we also have the opportunity to, do more replacements through our own city staff.
And I have discussed with engineering the possibility of, the tree roots that elevate sidewalks, and I know that there's a program for identifying those and fixing those as well to the best that we
Yes,
can.
and that's if it's a city-owned tree, the city pays 100% to fix the sidewalk.
And how do you just identify them yearly to see what's shifted and?
Yeah, no, we don't identify them yearly. They have to be reported.
Oh, they do.
Our
Okay.
program is
Really?
everything is a self-reported program. So, some people can either decide, I want my sidewalk replaced.
Yeah.
They can call us and get on the list. Erica Storley has done this new card, so we're going to be doing. So we have more money. We're going to be doing a lot more advertising of the program to see if we can get more interest, to get more residents on board.
But I think, especially if people knew about the replacement of those affected by parkway trees, that might be a draw.
That's right.
And in the meantime, at the same time, they might choose to extend the sidewalk a bit. But if the city's going to pay for those areas affected by the parkway trees, that's something I would like to get out to the residents.
Alderman Rain?
Suzette, don't forget to mention that a lot of sidewalk replacement is done 100% by community development block grant funds in CD target areas. Pardon me? A lot. Also, what does it cost for a square, sidewalk square?
About $500.
So it would be $250 also.
Oh, it's square.
So you said it was
Square.
125.
125.
That's what I thought.
So what's
It's about 5 by 5, so.
okay, but what is the amount you said? What's $500?
I said one flag of sidewalk, which is basically a 5 foot by 5 foot. Would be about
Wait,
You just said 125.
125.
5 by 5.
I don't want the square footage, I want the running foot. How many? One panel is $500.
No.
No.
One panel is 5 times 125 and 150. So that would be $500-$600 for one.
I don't know what a panel is.
It's a
Sidewalk
square.
Sidewalk
It's
square.
$500.
So a square of sidewalk in front of my house is gonna cost $500?
No.
No. What is gonna cost $500? Tell me. Running feet. I don't care what the square footage is. Running feet. If in front of my house, Suzette, if in front of my house it's 35 feet, how much would it cost to replace the squares in that 35 feet?
7 panels.
35 feet.
Seven panels? It would be 7 panels, so it would be 7 times what? 125. 125. All right, that was my, I'm sorry. Everybody's smarter than I am, but I didn't get it. Now I understand.
Wait, you're saying no.
He says not, that's not
Saying
right.
no.
I'm getting dumber by the minute.
No, 7 times 500.
So it is 500 a square.
It couldn't be, guys.
Madam Mayor.
We'll come back. We'll come
You know
back.
what, I will
We'll
tell
come
you,
back.
we'll come back, I'll text Seth, and
Yeah,
he'll tell me exactly what.
Okay, Alderman Holmes says it is not.
Because that would explain why nobody wants to.
Now that's a smart response.
I will find out and get the actual, because it's based on the bid, but we
I
have.
think it's
have
about
really good bids every
$125.
year.
That's all.
I don't have that information, but we'll get it for you.
Alderman Holmes.
Well, I was just going to comment on the sidewalks that are operated by trees, our parkway trees, and that is one of the most common complaints that I get from residents when the tree have uprooted from the sidewalk. And I know that it can be replaced, but then residents feel like they don't need to pay any of it. And I believe that the practice had been that you still ask for 50-50, and if you don't get it,
Not in my word, they don't.
I'm saying the common practice, I'll say it again, had been that you ask for 50-50. Now, certainly the city will pay. So we have to be very clear about how we do that.
Yes,
Okay.
and then we also have to be clear that it's an actual parkway tree.
Absolutely.
So, see, that's the key, it has to be the city's tree, and then if the city tree is causing the obstruction, then they pay 100% to fix the sidewalk. So, that's for sure, and I mean, there are people that know about the program,
And
we
some
have a
people that
list
don't.
of replacements, every year that call in for that. And we actually will go out, if you're not sure, we actually go out and we do the inspections based on any type of concern call that when we go out, we actually will apportion. So we'll come back and determine, hey, this is 100% replacement, this is, and then we send a letter to the resident and we have our recommendation in terms of what we think should be replaced, and they may say, well, can you replace all the walk? I'm willing to pay, so we have done extensions based on that.
Right.
So, okay, I think I got this directions. The last area is the alley program. So we have about 70 miles of alleys, and 41.7 miles, just a little over half, are actually paved. So we started out prior to the 1990s. The residents actually were responsible for 100% of alley resurfacing. And then the participation dwindled, and city council came up with a new methodology that they would pay 50%. So to give more residents increase in the program. And what I would tell you that it's a huge benefit for the alley pavement, not just the wear and tear on everybody's vehicles through the alley, but it also improves the drainage in the alleys. And so what we've seen is that we had an initial increase, but now our program numbers seem to be dwindling. We're probably getting 2 to 3 alley requests per year. So, it's just really, do we want to consider changing that percentage? And it may result in more applications, and it would deplete the funds unless we increase them. So,
Suzette, could you talk a little bit about alleys that are shared with between residential and commercial users? We talked about the commercial users picking up a greater percentage of the cost of the alley.
Well, we have a variety of methods that we use to determine responsibility. By and large, the most common one in our default is the unit method. Basically, if 10 people, 10 units are on the alley, the cost, the 50% share is shared equally with those 10 businesses. Sometimes we use square footage. So if it's a larger entity that may have a parking lot that's adjacent, then we may use a square footage calculation, and then those residential properties individually would end up paying less. But whatever the methodology, because it has to be approved by court, so we can't arbitrarily assign. We have to have a rationale. So there's the code, special assessment code is very specific in terms of acceptable methodology, and we have to meet those requirements. We have had, in some cases, where businesses that have more use for the alley have agreed to pay for more percentage of the alley. We had a few, I think it was 2 alleys where Northwestern has paid 100% because they occupied half of it, and they paid 100% for the alley to be paid, and it was at no cost to them. So then we have CDBG for that also covers the 50% of CDBG areas.
Alderman Ray?
Would you also explain about if one side of the alley is on a park or a railroad track or whatever?
Yes.
And also about the program that CDBG has to subsidize people who cannot afford to pay the assessment.
Okay. So much like the right-of-way street situation, if city property or any other public utility right-of-way is that area that is covered, that percentage is also covered by the city. So the city would cover its 50%, and then if, say, half of the alley was a city park, the city would pay 50% and 25% for being half of the property. So the residents on the other side would only have to pay 25% of the total cost. And in CDBG areas, we have 2 different programs. One, if you're in a CDBG area and it's an alley that was listed, that the CDBG funds pays the 50% resident share, and the city pays 50%. And then we also have, if it's in a CDBG area that we're doing an alley, but it's not the 50-50, the individual, they can income qualify. So it depends on what program the alderman selects for the particular alley. Sometimes they can decide to stretch the dollars further to reduce, to use the numbers to reduce the resident share overall. So what I mean by that is, so we had a situation where an alderman wanted to accomplish 2 alleys. He wanted to resurface 2 alleys. So to do that, instead of CDBG paying 50% of the resident share, it paid 25% for each resident share, and the residents only had to pay 25%, so we could get 2 alleys.
Suzette, we need to move on.
Okay.
I think that was the last slide.
Yes, that was the last.
Jean, is your preference we do utilities and then we'll have the discussion? Okay, great.
And just timing wise, the objective portion of this is substantive as well. And so you're getting a lot of good information here on the broad perspective, and that's very healthy for the next stage of discussion because you have a lot more work to do. And in order to help you do that, because of this fine discussion we just had on streets and alleys and paving and things like that, I have a little gift for you from California to keep you charged up for the rest of the evening. This is asphalt mix, which is a combination of chocolates, fruits, and nuts. And I know you have them here in Illinois as well, artisan chocolate manufacturers. But
Even here in Evanston, we have artisan chocolate.
Sure, and I love artisan chocolate wherever it is. So I will pass these out. You're welcome. Members of the public are welcome too. They're very tasty.
Thank you, Jean.
So, I just have one last point for summary. So, we're spending about $6 million a year for CIP for bonds. So, of that $6 million, 1.8% currently is dedicated to street resurfacing.
1.8 million.
1.8 million, I'm sorry, thank you. 1.8 million is dedicated to street resurfacing. 1.5 million.
Yeah, you guys took it up. Sorry.
1.5 million is matching funds for grants. So already 3.3 million is kind of earmarked from the CIP, so that leaves 2.7 million for parks and facilities. So what we described in terms of the age and condition, you have some serious work to do and serious issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Dave Stonebeck and his staff from utilities are here. We're about 15 minutes behind schedule at this point. We've asked Dave to go a little shorter because we've had a series of discussions with you over the last several months dealing with water and sewer infrastructure. What we wanted to share just sort of the scope of where we're at, and so Dave's presentation largely deals with lots of maps talking about the age of our infrastructure, so that won't take a lot of discussion, hopefully, but at the same time, these are also very important issues. Mr. Stonebeck, good evening.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Tisdale, Alderman, Dave Stonebeck, Utilities Director. We're going to break this presentation up into three areas: the sewer fund, the water fund, and then touch again on the wholesale water customers. We're going to focus tonight mostly on infrastructure, what work the department has completed through capital improvement programs in the past, and what our goals are for the future. In the sewer fund, our major cost, our number one cost, is the debt service. $11.5 million current year, going down to $10 million next year, and that is basically the result of the largest capital improvement project the city's ever undertaken, which was the long-range sewer improvement program. We believe that that program is very successful in hitting its major objective, which was to mitigate sewage backups in the basements. So we feel that that program has been very successful. Our next most expensive cost is operation and maintenance, and then followed by our capital improvement program. We generally ask for $1 million in capital improvement programs in the regular fund, and then we also try to obtain IEPA loans to help us rehabilitate sewers as well. So there are three different sewer systems in Evanston. The one that most people are familiar with is the combined sewer system, which is over 100 years old in most of the area, and it was not sized to handle storms combined, meaning it's supposed to handle sanitary sewer and rain during a storm. It's basically a sanitary sewer. That's what it's sized for. It's not very much larger at all. And then we built the reduced combined sewer system between 1990 and 2010. Its main purpose was to prevent sewage from backing up in the basement. what Evanston lacked was the ability to get storm water to the deep tunnel project, to the district's park project, and that's what the relief sewer did. And then our third system is the storm sewer system. One note on this, for the combined sewer and the relief sewer system, we are regulated by the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, or NPDS permit that we have to obtain. And under the storm sewer system, we are required to meet the municipal separate storm sewer system, or MS4 permit requirements. So we are red related for both those systems. This map is showing the combined sewer system, the smaller than 36-inch diameter sewers that have been rehabilitated since 1987 through 2013. During that time, of the 133 miles of small diameter pipe, we have already lined 23.5, which is 18%. Our goal is to try to rehabilitate 1% or 1.4 miles of sewer main a year. The department budgets about $500,000 a year to meet this goal, and over the last 5 years, we have been successful at rehabilitating 1.4 miles for the smaller diameter sewer main. This map depicts the large diameter, 36-inch or larger diameter sewer mains in the combined sewer system. The green are the sewer mains that have already been rehabilitated. The red is somewhat misleading. It indicates that they have not been rehabilitated, but there are approximately 3 miles of larger diameter sewer main that it has been replaced with new concrete pipe. So I should get a third color up there showing newer sewer mains that don't need work. So we have about 7 miles that need to be rehabilitated. And prior to 2013, we had 1 mile rehabilitated of that 7 miles. In 2013, we actually were able to rehabilitate 1.3 miles using a $3.1 million loan from the IPA. And we also rehabilitated another 1/4 mile using $600,000 from 2 different TIF funds. So we actually accomplished 1.5 miles of large diameter in 2013. In 2014, we've already received a loan from the IEPA to rehabilitate another mile of sewer main, and that's on Central Park, right in this stretch over here, and then over on Main Street between Chicago Avenue and Sheridan Road, the part that hasn't been lined already will be rehabilitated. We already had that loan, so that will start in 2014. We are lined up with the IPA to continue to receive loans. We hope to do another 1.5 miles between 2015 and 2017 in loan offers that the IPA has already indicated that I'm on the fast track to get. And so hopefully by 2017, we'll have rehabilitated 67% of the large diameter sewers. And to me, that's a good thing because that's the area that I thought we weren't meeting our goal on at all.
Alderman Ray?
Dave, could you clarify, is the debt service on the loans from the IEPA paid out of the water sewer fund, or do we bond for those people?
It is paid for out of the sewer fund. We had to resell some bonds to make it last, but right now we don't project that we need to sell any more sewer bonds. That the fund is working appropriately under our current sewer rate.
Okay, thank you.
This map represents the relief sewer system. And again, this is where we spent the $210 million to convey stormwater out to the park system. The other part that's not really shown on this map are the restrictors that went into the drainage structures. They're still connected to the combined sewer. So the whole purpose of this plan was that we didn't put a new storm sewer on every street. That was going to be the cost-effective way of doing it. At $210 million, that was a cheaper route. And then we put restrictors in the drainage structure that is still connected to the combined sewer. That keeps the stormwater up on the street. And it will for at least an hour to an hour and a half after the rain event is over. If it gets too high, the water flows downhill and it is intercepted by the relief sewer. But yes, we will have stormwater on the street for a considerable amount of time. We feel that that is better on the street than sewage water in the basement. So that's the purpose of that.
Dave, is there a way of notifying residents where those restrictors occur?
We do
Because
have a
I've had
map,
lots
and if
of
I put it up here, the whole city will look blue, because
Okay.
that, it literally are on every street.
Yeah, when people
It's really hard, and they're in the alleys, they're on the streets. It covers the entire city. And one of the things that we hope to do in 2014 is we've begun to budget to have a sewer system hydraulic analysis completed. It's something we always talk about doing at the end of the long-range sewer program. We haven't had the funding to do it, so we're hoping to start it. We're going to take it off in bite-sized chunks and go in the future.
What
The
is-
next map shows our
Dave?
storm sewer system.
Dave?
Oh, I'm sorry.
What is the analysis that you just described?
It would just indicate which sewer mains are still being surcharged and under what conditions. So our system, in my opinion, works very well as long as the TARP system isn't full capacity. So the deep tunnel at times, now in April, when we had that rain event, the deep tunnel was already filled at 1 o'clock in the morning. The heavy rain didn't come until 4 o'clock in the morning. The canal level rose to a level I've never seen it at before. It actually topped to the top of the locks up at Little Neck Harbor. So it was the hydraulic grade line there was very high, and if your basement elevation was lower than that elevation, I'm sorry, there was nothing that we could do to prevent the storm. But we want to try to see if there are other improvements that we can make, especially since the district is hoping to bring the tunnel online allegedly within the next couple of years. They've been saying that forever.
Thank you.
This is the storm sewer system. The part in the northern portion was built as part of the relief sewer program. This is a storm sewer system because it goes to the canal and or the lake. It does not connect to the park in any way, shape, or form. So all the water here discharges to the canal. The part in the southwest portion of the city, some of that was built in the late 1980s as they were paving the streets, and then some of it got extended during the relief sewer program. So that's basically about a 20-year-old system or so. We are also beginning to fund money now for an annual stormwater management program. In 2014, we allocated $250,000 to this, and our intent is to keep stormwater out of the combined sewer system. So that whole $250,000 was spent in conjunction with the Davis Street project. So all the parking lanes have impervious concrete in it. So the stormwater that used to go into the combined sewer on Davis Street, hopefully will now just go into the ground and will help relieve surcharging in the combined sewer system. So those are the opportunities that we're looking for. We hope to work with Public Works to see what other projects are upcoming. I understand some city parking lots may be paved. That's an opportunity to put some porous pavement in. And then other large street projects that they do, that we can do that, we will. The other goal is if we can't come up with those projects, that we would actually extend the relief sewer onto the streets where it doesn't exist yet, and then connect those drainage structures to the relief sewer, and then we can remove some of the restrictors, which would help mitigate some of the street flooding that we're experiencing. So that's our goal with that one. With any capital improvement program, you have to have maintenance. And we do a lot of in-house maintenance by ourselves. So we're cleaning drainage structures and pipelines in 1/3 of the city every year to make sure that we don't have grass growing down the drainage structures and the sewers actually flow. We post circuit televising of the sewer mains under the streets that are proposed to be resurfaced. And then we do regular maintenance on the sewer infrastructure. We have just over 15,000 drainage structures and manholes in the city of Evanston, and those are subject to fail. And we have been using our own crews to keep those up and maintained. So that's what our in-house does. Any questions about the sewer system before I jump into the distribution system? Okay, moving right along. This is a map that you've all seen before. The red indicates the water mains that are over 100 years old. The gold or the brown indicates water mains that are 80 to 100 years old. We have a total of 157 miles of water main pipe. 87 miles, or 55%, are over 80 years old. Our goal right now is to replace 1% of the water main a year, which means 1.5 miles. And if we do that, it will take 58 years to replace all the water mains that are 80 years and older, which means that some will replace 130, 150 years old before they actually get replaced. So we currently are probably spending more money than a lot of municipalities in the North Shore area on water main replacement, but I think we have older water mains in a lot of municipalities in Evanston as well. At some point, we may run into a pinch where 1% won't be enough, but at this time, except for Central Street a year or two ago, we haven't had those consistent water main breaks that I would say, you know, it's a big problem, we need to do more, we need to do more. I think that we're handling it fairly well at our 1% rate. I would encourage you to allow us to use TIF funding as TIF funding becomes available to replace other water mains. We're using it currently from the Washington National with Data Street, and there's other opportunities for us to do this as well. The one water main that's very hard to see up here, it's highlighted in black, but it's a 30-inch water main that originates at the water plant and pretty much runs down into downtown Evanston. It's also a major portion of a loop that starts. There's a 24-inch water main that goes off that, moves around the perimeter of the city as well. And if that water main were to fail, it'd be a big issue. We've had 2 failures on it already. Fortunately, they occurred during the day, and we were able to observe them and fix them rapidly. My fear is that if it breaks at night, we don't observe it right away. When a 30-inch water main becomes a big water main break, it becomes a river. There'll be a lot of accidents. So that's why we have included in our 5-year capital improvement program to replace this water main as well. And that's one of the major expenses. This map indicates
When you replace a main like that, do you do side by side? How do you build it inside? How do you do that without interrupting the flow of water?
we would have to build another water main before we took that one out of place.
Yeah, okay.
And it may not go on the same street.
But you would do another one?
Yes, that was our, and in fact, we are beginning to look at the use of liner inside a water main as well.
Like in Situform?
Like in Situform, very similar. There's only one company that will do larger than 24-inch diameter water main, and you can get it for a smaller water main, but I'm not very confident in the water tightness reconnection of the water surfaces that come off that water main. They're doing it around the country, and you know, but it's relatively new. It hasn't been out there for 15 years, and I'm afraid right now, looking at what I've seen, that they can make it watertight for right now, but I don't know that it will be watertight 50 years from now.
That's the Sherman Avenue one,
That
isn't
is
it?
Sherman Avenue.
Oh, okay, so we could use TIF money for that part of downtown that is affected, but how far would that TIF money go even if it was outside of the TIF?
I was told that it could do the entire water main project, but I don't believe that there's sufficient funding because it serves the downtown area so much that it would, because it originates.
We could make a finding.
No, but we're outside the TIF now, and so the question is,
where you started.
Okay, so we would
I
start.
was told that because
it's in.
One of the water mains in downtown will function very well without this water main.
Okay, oh good, okay.
It potentially could be, but it's such an expensive cost.
There's not that much money in the TIF.
$7.2 million to replace this water main that the Washington National TIF may not be able to afford it. There's other.
Okay, but it's still, I mean.
It's a funding source. It's
Yeah,
something
we've
that
got
could be
6
available.
years. And does that run all the way to Central Street? Is that, and then it runs
It
down,
goes
or
to
does it
Lincoln
Lincoln? And then it goes straight down to the water.
Yes.
Okay.
But just think, if that had been part of the downtown TIF, we had $9 million we dispersed. We could have used $9 million to replace the line.
Right. I can't.
That was just
blurry. Yeah.
Can you just, Dave, for maybe a future presentation, give us that same information with TIF maps overlaying
Yes, and
projects?
if you look in the CIP program that's coming out, we actually, in West Evanston TIF, I think we've allocated close to, we've identified $5 million of need of water main in the West Evanston TIF. We identified $2.7 million in the Chicago main TIF, and another $500,000 in the Washington National TIF. So yes, we could provide maps and all that for you as well. Jumping back to the last map, and
just a couple of clarifications. The Washington National TIF has had, as you're aware from the CAP meetings, has had significant reversals in the assessed valuation. So to say that it can pay for the entire water main project is not the case. It may be able to in the future, but it cannot now. The West Evanston TIF, we moved those projects out to the 5th year of a CIP because that TIF is not going to have the funding for those projects. So if we're doing our long-term planning, the TIFs are kind of on hold for the next 2 years at least as funding mechanisms for capital.
And I agree wholeheartedly. I'm just making you aware that we've identified them so that funding becomes available. And I'm fully aware that there's not funding available right now. But we want to be prepared if 20 years when the TIF closes, if there's $9 million left or something like that, we have spending.
And the $9 million was distributed. It was not a surplus. So at that point in time, the surplus was $1.3 million. It was the next year's levy of $9 million that everybody then gathered up and used. But there wasn't $9 million as a surplus.
Right. And it wasn't on the city's project.
So moving right along, go back to so again, these are the water mains that have been replaced since 1987. There's 32.5 miles of that, and again, our goal is to replace 1.5 miles per year. In the last 5 years, we've actually averaged 1.6 miles, so we are hitting our goal with our current funding. This map does show all the wards, and what we've identified on this map are the water mains that need replacement because they're a maintenance problem. They're shown in the dashed lines, and the solid lines are indicating water mains that we propose to replace because we had a hydraulic analysis completed, and they indicated that we should increase the size to meet fire flow demand. So that's that story. And again, we do a lot of in-house work in the distribution system. The water mains are old, but the fire hydrant program, 98% of the fire hydrants are less than 50 years old. 70% of the valves are less than 50% old. So if we do have a fire, the hydrants are going to work. If we do have a main break, we can isolate a smaller area to fix that main because the valves are working as well. We do leak detection program, and in fact, last year, in the current budget, we bought new leak detection equipment. It's working fabulous for us. We're able to check a lot more of the city's water mains now and identify leaks and get them corrected as soon as possible. And the last thing that we instituted in 2012 was a cross-connection control program. We've actually increased the number of devices that are out there from 1,400 when we started the program in 2008. We currently have, we doubled it. We have 2,800 devices that we're now keeping track of to make sure the water is safe. That's ending the distribution system. Now we're jumping into the treatment plant. The treatment plant itself is pretty well maintained and functioning well, but it is aging as well. We've identified, next year we're celebrating 100 years of clean treated water in Evanston. The filters that were initially built were completed in 2014 and went into service in, I'm sorry, in 1914. Yeah, 1914, when we get the year right, the century right. And but those facilities, we've actually done some testing of the concrete over there, and it's in not good condition after being 100 years old. So we're doing some plant reliability improvements, and that will allow us to get almost the same quantity of water through our 12 new filters and be able to take the first 12 filters out of service for repairs if we need to do that. Our finished water reservoir, 5 million gallons. Again, we had a concrete analysis completed on that. It's not in good shape, and so we're looking to replace that, and that's going to be $26 million.
Where is that reservoir located?
That reservoir is located underneath the parking lot on Northwestern University property.
So that, I'm raising my red flag.
I know.
That that property is, we have a lease that's with Northwestern that says that as long as there is a water plant next door, we may have a reservoir there The location of that reservoir, interestingly, is the front door of the new athletics facility. And so as we talk with the university about what our options would be for that reservoir, at this point we think our best option is to leave the reservoir there and not move it across the street. And so as we are talking with the university, now is the time for us to sort this out before they build this large athletic facility on the doorstep of the reservoir. So that is going to be a point of discussion between the city and Northwestern University here over the next 12, 18 months. So I raise that to your attention.
Alderman Burrows.
Isn't there a problem with that reservoir?
The reservoir, as Dave indicated, the
Yeah.
concrete around it is deteriorating and
we're
needs to
looking
be.
replace it. It's $8 million to replace the roof, but then the rest of it's 80 years old. I don't think we want to spend $8 million to partially repair something that's already 80 years old. It's time for a new reservoir.
So our intent is to use the footprint of the existing reservoir.
What do we do when we're doing a new reservoir?
We've had an engineer look at it. We can still meet treatment requirements. We just have to coordinate our pump changes very well to be able to run with 5 million that we'll still have at the water plant. We normally have 10 million gallons in storage. We'll be down to 5 million if we take the reservoir out.
Will you restrict water use?
We would not, no. We would just have to very closely match demand.
So when would you do it in the summer?
It would be, we believe that it would be a 20 to 22 month construction duration.
Wow. So we can do it. Cover every month.
Yes. Some of the other pipe intake improvements, we are getting a loan from the IPA to put a heated intake system and replace the muscle system in our 48-inch diameter intakes. And then we're looking at new meters in the chemical feed project at the water plant. Everybody should be aware that we're doing the meter reading system upgrade. We're going around to everybody's home, putting in the new MIUs. And then another key factor is the standpipe painting. These were actually a little bit later in our CIP, but because the reservoir needs to be replaced 3 years out, we want our standpipe reservoirs to be in full service, so one gets painted in 2014, the other one gets painted in 2015, and then the reservoir will start after that standpipe is back in service.
Alderman Ray.
Dave, can you tell us what it looks like to a homeowner when somebody comes to change out their water meter? There've been some complaints about strangers coming to people's doors, claiming they're the city or whatever. How is that going to work?
The vast majority of the work that we're doing is actually just replacing the little gray box that's on the exterior of people's homes. So we aren't knocking on those. If they need to get inside, replace the MIU that's inside or the meter, those people are receiving letters and phone calls saying that you need to schedule an appointment with us. Please don't let anybody into your building unless you already have a pre-scheduled appointment for it.
Will the letter come before the phone call? I hope so.
Kevin? Yes, the letter comes first and then the phone call.
Okay.
And then the pictures of the people that are doing the work are available on the 311 site. They all have the red city ID card with them. And again, they should only come when you have scheduled an appointment with them.
Good.
The major projects that have been completed at the water plant over the last 20 years, there was a big capital improvement program in 1982, but since then we haven't really done a whole lot. We've done some maintenance, but we did put the heated intake in the 54-inch diameter intake. We removed all the asbestos in our building, which is a multi-year project. We improved the 12 east filters, increasing their rating and reliability. We replaced the 30-year-old SCADA system just recently, and we did install a chlorine scrubber. So we do have a chlorine leak out there, because we cleaned the chlorine out before it hit the atmosphere.
Dave, I think in the interest of time, I think the council's pretty familiar with our current discussions on the water sales. Maybe we can just go to the Lincolnwood slide. I think, as the council is aware, we have been working with the Village of Lincolnwood on a proposal. We're in the final stages of that proposal and should have additional information for the council here probably in the next 45 to 60 days. The outlook for the remainder of the wholesale water customers, we continue to meet with Niles, Park Ridge, and Des Plaines. Morton Grove and Glenview have also expressed interest. The Northwest Water Commission, our partners for a number of years, are also meeting with many of these communities. So all of this is in play right now, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. The Northwest Suburban Municipal Joint Action Water Agency, also known as NIMSI Jawa, which is a set of 7 additional communities, including Schaumburg and
Hoffman
Estates, Elk Grove Village. We should hear from by the end of the year. So lots is happening there, and I'll let Dave sum up from that.
The wholesale water sales is very fluid type of, every week I get a different phone call. More people are involved, Glenview's involved, all of a sudden Morton Grove's back in it.
There's always something bubbling up with it.
There's so many different options, and everybody has to do their due diligence to make sure what's the best route to go, that it is taking time. I don't think anybody's going to come back and say they can find water cheaper or better quality than what they can get from Evanston. And we are basing our proposed rates on a true cost of service study based on the industry standard AWWA standard for setting rates, which then protects the Evanston ratepayer. So be very forceful on that.
Any questions of water, sewer? Ms. Bonander.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
We met in this group, and the council took its 15 goals for 2013 and narrowed those to its key categories in 2 subsets. One is the capital improvement program, and the other is the programmatic side. Tonight we are dealing with the capital improvement side, as you're well aware, because of the excellent presentations that you've had so far tonight, covering your capital facilities, your parks, your streets, your water utility, and your wastewater utility and storm drainage system. So that is basically your city's safety net, how everything connects, how everything works together on the ground level. What you do on top of the ground is your programmatic side, and we'll talk about that in November. So tonight it was broken down into a couple of categories, and the goal side of this was set last time. The next step in this process is setting of objectives, and in particular we want to clarify what you want done in the upcoming 2014 budget year and beyond. So the capital side of things, all of these elements are not short-term prospects in any way, shape, or form. Even to build something, you're going through, I believe it's the Davis Street reconstruction right now. The construction itself is extensive, time-consuming, disruptive. How long did it take you to plan for that? How long did it take you to assemble the financing for that? Capital projects are multiple year, sometimes multiple decade projects, and hopefully they last for multiple decades too, but not always. And sometimes they can be repaired, but sometimes they have to be replaced. So all of that is very long-term thinking. And part of what you talked about last time was the need to data mine. What information do you need to really make good decisions about how to look at your capital infrastructure from a priority standpoint, and then ultimately from a funding standpoint, because that's, as we talked before, the elephant in the room. How do you pay for big ticket items? And the history of municipalities dealing with capital infrastructure is a difficult history. It is so much easier to keep programs and people going than it is to really seriously look at your infrastructure, primarily because of the cost and the time involved. And cities have tended not to invest their effort there if they didn't have to. They didn't feel the immediacy of it. One of the challenges of capital infrastructure is if you've got an immediate problem, it's a very messy and it's a very costly problem. When a water main breaks, when a sewer backs up, when a street fails. Those are expensive to fix on an emergency basis. So if you can plan for it, if you can allocate funding for it, if you can have reserves set aside for those emergencies, which will happen, even in the best planned places, something happens on occasion. But if you have your strategy in place, you've got more opportunities, more options to fix things than you would otherwise. And it's less expensive if you map it out over the long term. So tonight, we're going to look at city facilities, city streets, and city facilities, I'm including parkland in that. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The water utility and the wastewater utility. And when you create objectives, this is basically the framework. Who is going to do what, by when, and for what purpose? So that's the why, the who, what, where, when, why. The how, you give the policy direction, your staff prepares the how. And to make it easy for you, and this is hopefully no surprise to Wally, but the who is probably for the most part going to be staff. So we are not going to ask you as individual council members to go out and put in asphalt mix, for instance. So,
Could be fun.
It could be, and learning new skills is always important. So, but the who, what, where, when, and why is the structure for setting objectives. So. So with city facilities, a possible objective, and this is of course up to you, is do you have the adequate inventory about your facilities that you need to make decisions about priorities and the asset value to the community? And asset value is usually a financial term, but for communities, asset value means more than just the monetary cost of the facility operations, et cetera. It also means what does it contribute to the quality of life and how do you evaluate that? So how do you judge that? So what would an inventory include for you? But what are the components of information that you would need about each one of your facilities to help you decide what are priorities, what are not?
Number of users?
Well, number and type of users, and then also the cost of maintaining it.
Revenue generated by the users.
Mm-hmm.
It's expected useful life.
Okay, slow down now. And what was yours? I'm sorry?
Revenue.
The revenue generated by the users, if it's like a parks recreation facility.
Useful life is what Jane said.
Expected useful life.
Not only of the structure, Jane, but of all the systems.
Mm-hmm.
They may have been in places or not.
The operational cost is a little different than the maintenance cost.
Yeah.
What does it cost to actually run it, operate it?
Others?
I think the first one, type of use, it's not necessarily that, but number and type of users.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
like actually who's using it.
And the value to the community.
Yeah.
The value
The
to the
asset
community.
value?
How does that get determined?
I'm sure staff keeps stats on that.
The value to the
Kids
community?
registered in
Well,
programs.
Subjective.
I'm talking about
It's really subjective.
So what does value to the community mean to you?
That's-
Wow.
What does it have to do with, does it serve the entire community and all of your demographics? Does it have a heritage, a cultural heart for your community?
Is it what types of users, active,
active.
passive, community
Right.
gathering space,
Basic,
has
that kind,
value?
all of the above.
Is it a
Right.
place?
Simply like we
Place,
put a value on the Levy Center by making it for seniors.
Right.
So, you know, that value to the community is that. So it all depends on how.
Well, the value of, for instance, if it's a recreational facility, the value of recreation to the community,
Absolutely.
providing that.
It adds to the value of properties. in the community.
You can add
recreation.
the health of your
Yeah,
community.
yeah.
Center adds to the economy of the community, whereas the incentive is not.
And then there's Harley Park, which detracts from them.
That would be under liabilities and.
It's such a mess.
Well, that
Duplicative.
duplication?
What is that?
Duplication.
Oh.
Is
Because
there
something
any-
like our lakefront adds to the ambiance and the importance of our community. It gives us prestige, our lakefront. So the importance of maintaining that and enhancing its amenities, I think, is really important.
Will it accommodate future use or expectations?
Have flexibility?
Right.
Are we gonna count trees in this? Because they
Trees not a
cost
fac-
us a lot of.
But they're not a
Yeah,
facility.
trees are an interesting.
It's not a
one because
facility, it's an
It's an asset.
infrastructure.
But it is,
asset.
it's an infrastructure asset and
I just don't want us to forget them. It might not belong up
Yeah.
there, but
I think it's gonna show up in two places, your trees or your parks and open space and your
okay.
streets.
Oh, good point.
Okay.
Is there room in an inventory for the larger perspective on facilities, like best practices and whether other communities do, kind of outside perspective on the value of facilities?
Oh, another issue is how does our facilities fit in with the surrounding areas? For instance,
They're complementary to.
right, Skokie has their pools that we can use, and what do we provide the ice rink that others use?
Yeah, I was
And
part
our
of that under
beaches.
duplicative facilities. It's like, what is,
Well,
are we replicating
Yeah.
what other people have nearby?
Are you talking about
Well-
potential for shared services?
Yes, that's what I meant, in terms of how do we complement each other with.
Kind of the flip side of duplication
Yeah.
is opportunity for shared.
No, but it's inventorying, you're looking at what's duplicative and what's not, so it's
Right.
same thing.
And looking at it regionally, more than just within our own community.
Okay, what about baseline data, like when it was constructed? You heard this evening, Suzette gave an excellent summary of how much you've spent in the last 5 years to maintain these properties. And also an excellent listing of 16 of what the staff and the community, and I've heard council members say too, is patchwork repairs for keeping these things held together in the next year. And they're in capital planning, you got to do both. You've got to put your budget together for the things that you know you're going to need to do, because if you don't, you wait on it, it's going to cost you more, and you know that this is something you have to fix now. You also need to have longer term strategies on what are your priorities for the major renovation, the major replacement. I think I told you last time I worked for the city of Mountain View, and they were doing an asbestos rebatement and ended up building a brand new city hall as a result. They just went in and found more than they ever imagined, and it was cheaper to tear it down. And so that could be another kind of asset valuation is what's worth keeping.
It's like a cost-benefit analysis for each facility.
But
and another complication with if a facility is and the community decides this, the council representing the community and with community input, all of these issues are going to be widely discussed in your community, I'm absolutely certain. But what are the, if there are duplicates or there are facilities that you have that are in such poor condition that they can no longer be maintained, they can no longer be rehabilitated, it's rare for a community to go in and build exactly what was there. Building codes have changed, uses have changed. So how do you talk about that kind of a strategy? How do you want to talk about that kind of a strategy if you do have to do something like that?
I've talked previously about the focus of the city in acquiring, especially Carly Clark and the Civic Center and Noise Cultural Arts Center, really acquiring that for parkland. And so over the years we haven't put much money into it because the thought has been it's the park that's the value. And I think Carly Clark probably is the prime example of that, where we entered into a contract that I'm sure we wouldn't enter into now of $1 a year. We would have thought about that a little bit more. But I think this is a really good opportunity to look at, is that something that we want to maintain? Is the Civic Center something we want to maintain? Is the Noise Cultural Arts Center something that we want to maintain? It seems to me that noise is working really well, and somehow that landed into the prime position of we found tenants that use the center well, that reflect the community's values, and are paying almost market rents. And it's staying sort of afloat. We've talked over the years about the Civic Center. If we were building a Civic Center, we wouldn't build this building. But the fact that the building is here, and it was here at the time, and there was some money put into it, over the years it has been maintained to some degree, and it's certainly a value now. Carly Clark, I can't speak to. In terms of would we rebuild that now? No, we wouldn't. We wouldn't have the money to do that. Is it a value? I don't know what the answer to that is. But I do understand where we came from, and I don't want to blame the city or anyone, because I think it's good to look back at what the policy was at the time and whether that's a policy we want to stick with or not. So.
Well, I'm not sure that we even have a policy, Judy. I was really shocked when I looked at the figures tonight from Suzette's presentation in terms of the money that we spent in the Civic Center and other facilities over these last, 5 years, I guess it is, and in comparison with what we've spent for community centers. I mean, if you look at it, and I really worry that, and I came in 2005 at the time when big conversations was going on about whether to keep the Civic Center or not. And when Jean asked, how do we talk about that? How do we make decisions about that? I'm not sure that we have a policy to do that, because what happens is that even if we're on a, if we're on a train to maybe do something about it, there are a lot of different proposals. But something happens, and then before we know it, then we're caught up in saying, oh, well, we need to preserve it because of blah, blah, blah. And then I don't even think the community will realize how much money that we've spent trying to keep this building afloat, and it still needs so much more. Because what we don't have here tonight on any of these is what needs to be spent in the future, which is, very difficult. So I think that we need to maybe develop a policy in terms of how we're going to do this. And one of the things that would make me happy if we ever got to talk it through as a council, no matter what the subject is, and I don't care what the outcome might be, but to really have a conversation like Holly Park. We never got to discuss Holly Park. So if you want to, I'm still stuck on that.
Right.
I won't want to discuss it. The outcome, it may be whatever. But we need to be able to talk about it as a council. I mean, that's what we get elected for.
But it's also good to know where we came from and sort of why things have evolved the way they have. And here's where we are, without attaching any blame to...
Well, I'm not trying to blame anyone. I'm just simply saying
yeah, I know
that we need to look at it.
Yeah, I know you're not.
Well,
But ditto you, Dolores. Good speech.
I think the best example of a way we could go forward with any new strategy for buildings is to begin the public discussion, which has not taken place, of Robert Crown. What are we going to do there? How much should we spend? I heard today something I had no idea was going on, and that is that the Parks Board is discussing fixing up the current location. Now, how smart is that in my mind? Not smart. But you know what? Maybe 60% of the population thinks that's a great idea. I think we ought to throw this out into the public, have the discussion, and this afternoon when we were talking to Jean, I even suggested that because this is a $20–30 million project, if we do it right, and if we get a public-private thing going or not, that maybe we should consider, and this would be way at the end of the public discussion, maybe we should consider putting out a referendum, a binding referendum, regarding a special bond issue to do the Robert Crown, which would no longer be called Robert Crown, by the way, because they're not helping, to rebuild it, to reconstruct a facility that would be very inclusive of a variety of activities. If the public wants it, let them pay for it. If they don't want it, fine, we'll put a couple of Band-Aids on it or something. But I just think that that is a classic example, being Harley Clark being the example of how not to do a public process. Not to do it. I thought it was shameful, managed shamefully, dealt with shamefully by the community, and no leadership was shown on the part of the council, regardless of how it turned out. I just think it was a free-for-all, and it didn't produce a good result. And I don't think we should ever make that mistake again. So.
I think as part of this, we need to understand our demographic trends. That is, who's going to be using recreation programming? Will they do it inside? Will they do it outside? What are our future consumers going to be looking for? Will city government always be of this size, and will it always need a huge service center? I think we got to understand what the trends are, not just demographically, but in all dimensions.
Well, I also think, and this goes to Dolores's point about this building, because I've been on the council and voted to move out of this building. But I think there has to be an understanding of all of our facilities, not just each individual one, but all of them, so that we then are making an intelligent, or at least an educated decision about, we have this much money, and these other buildings are going to cost this much more to maintain. Can we afford to spend this much to stay in this particular building? Or can we afford to maintain this particular facility? Or do we have to change the programming, change how we operate? It's the comprehensive understanding of how much it costs to operate and to maintain, and then to put in reserve the money that we're going to need to rebuild whatever it is we want to use in the future. And that's what I have to say all the time I've been on the council. in terms of capital spending, it's just doling it out without really understanding a big enough picture. I think we had a bit of a sense of how much the endless need that we have in our streets, that we're just trickle paying, but not really an understanding of how much, for instance, I didn't understand what the service center needed until I took a tour of it. And I think, this is just a quick footnote, I think we probably have been putting more money into our community centers, but we've been neglecting other things in the last couple of years. And the service center was one I think we neglected for 10 years. So I think it's in order, all of these things are important, but we need to understand this about every one of our facilities.
Yeah, your street survey is very comprehensive and detailed, so you know about your street segments. And that, of course, is easier to characterize because the street is different from buildings and service centers and things like that. One other distinction between your facilities is you have facilities that you need to have in place to keep the government structure running. So you need to have a civic center, a city hall. You need to have your libraries or your buildings, your service center, out of which your maintenance operations occur. There's no point in spending any money on anything if you can't maintain it, and especially new money. So it's one of the nice things about new buildings is hopefully they need less maintenance and maybe less operating costs, but you won't know that until you do complete surveys of what you've got and where you think you want to go. So.
Anne and then Mark have questions.
Melissa, I agree with the concept, but no organization had more information about cost-benefit analysis of staying in this building or moving. No, there has never been anything studied more deeply or provided more information on. And we made the choice to stay here where we knew it was a money pit. We knew that, and we made that decision. And the reason we made that decision, there are other things that come into play. We couldn't find a place to move.
That's right.
We just couldn't do it.
No, all of us voted to leave, and then and I think every one of us who was still on the council who had voted to leave, but realized that the vision that we had to leave no longer existed.
So it's not always we really had the information. Nobody was misled.
My point is, I didn't have the information on how much it cost to run all of our other facilities as well as this one. You're right. We did understand that this building was desperately in need of repairs, and still is. I mean, we all knew about the heat pump system. We heard about that forever.
In our earlier talks, you mentioned something about having a longer plan, a 50-year plan. And I think if we started projecting costs over a longer period of time, it would be a much more convincing argument for ourselves, to learn, and for people to buy into, realizing that, this is just progressing as a deeper and deeper money pit, and ultimately end up with nothing, rather than start saving and putting into a new facility. So I think I think a long-term plan, very long-term plan, is really would be very helpful.
I also think, what do we say no to? And that's, and I think that's, in some ways, maybe even the bigger issue is we say no to nothing, or very little. So then you find, even though you have the data, that if you did a cost benefit, you would say, we can't do X, but we don't stop a program, we don't close down a building. That's not done. It's, well, we'll just hold off on it and we'll let it deteriorate more until people have yard signs and pitchforks. And then we're like, well, maybe. So even though there's data, it seems that decisions are made on an emotional, not a rational basis more often than not. So when is it time to cut bait? And I don't think that there is a threshold or criteria established to do that.
Or even data.
But we don't.
Yeah, it's in the data.
But we don't do it, is my point.
Okay, what you need to get out of this is you don't have enough information to make decisions about what you have in your facilities right now. So an objective for the next year could include asking staff to, and there was a piece of this in Suzette's report about investing some money in inventory. But you're the ones who set the criteria for what information ought to be part of that inventory. And what you've said already here is a really good start on what pieces of information you need, facility by facility. And I have a couple of others, and you've gotten most of them down here, but in some of these you do have leases, partnerships. Some entity has use of the facility for some special reason. And are those documented? Are those rational and reasonable? The Harley Clark Mansion was $1 a year lease. In this day and age, you can't do stuff like that anymore. Cities have done it for decades, but they simply cannot do it anymore. You are not a business, and there's a huge distinction when the media often says, well, run government more like a business and it will be much easier. Well, you can't do that because you serve your entire population within your boundaries, and you don't get to choose them. They are yours to serve, despite ethnicity, demography, age, physical condition, children, elderly, all of those intricacies you have to serve. You can't pick your market. You can't decide you're just going to serve, young moms from 18 to 34. You've got to serve everybody. So, but what I think the public does expect is that government will be operated in a business-like manner. And what that means is if you do have relationships with other entities, if you have relationships with your neighboring cities or a public-private partnership of some sort or nonprofits, then a component of what you need to do is be very business-like about that. What's a reasonable course of action for negotiations? And you have to be hard-nosed because you don't have unlimited funds to throw at things. You don't have unlimited time to throw at things. You have a limited staff. You have limited time. And you've got to be really smart about how those partnerships are created. So leases, what all those arrangements are that you have currently, you want to continue those. So if that's okay with you, I'll put that up there.
Yeah, we should have those.
Alderman Fisk.
I'd also like to know some recommendations from staff for alternate uses of facilities. For example, would it be possible for city staff to occupy half of this building and Piven Theater to occupy the other half? Or do we need all the facilities? Do we need all the buildings? Is there an opportunity to share? Sort of brainstorm on that.
In other words, highest and best use of your existing facility. What are your highest and best uses, or potential highest? There's not always one. You will almost always have a selection to choose from.
Well, there's also the other problems associated with any kind of redevelopment or looking at alternate uses. For example, this building, I would imagine that if this building weren't here, the property would be redeveloped for some residential use, and that is totally dependent on the economy. And so the timing has to be good, or it doesn't work at all.
The economic point that Judy just made is a good one, because you can't always do what you want when you want. And the last 5 years were limited. And so are there opportunities based on what's going on economically that could affect the city?
Student housing. Well, we're still here because he entitled home.
How do you determine, once you'll go through this process, how do you want to think about what's an asset and what's a liability? When you add everything up, you add all the revenue coming in, you add the operating costs, you add the age of the building, how much you're estimating it's going to be maintained. Your capper will tell you what the current asset value is, and that shows up in your financial documents, but that's not the value to the community. So then how do you know, how will you know when you want to say, I've had enough, let's give up this facility and let it go? And that could mean tearing it down and replacing it. It could mean tearing it down and not needing it anymore. It could be moving it somewhere else. It could mean, are there enough facilities that no longer serve the public and one new one somewhere else might better serve? So how do you get your scales out and balance that, weigh those? When is it time to give up? And how do you help the community understand that? Because the no question that Colleen raised is the most challenging one that elected officials face, because almost everything has a constituency. Someone will show up and say, I had my wedding there 60 years ago, and you can't tear that down. And it happens.
There was a school here.
Yeah, I went to school here. Lots of things. So how do you want to talk about assets, liabilities, what's of value to the community now, and help the community come to terms with these big, high expense questions?
Melissa?
Well, I think it's change, and people always are uncomfortable with change. Everybody is uncomfortable with change. But I think and we found this in my experience, and we talked about this earlier today, as we did it with the budget, I think the more information and education you do of the citizenry, the better they have, the more information they have to understand what the decision-making process is for the council. So I think that's how you have, to my mind, that's how we've been able to change the budget process, so that we don't have these emotional pleas nearly as much as we used to have on the final day.
As to budget.
As to budget. I mean, and it's because people have understood, what all of these choices are here, and if we plead for this, then that means something else has to go. So I think it's in the same way that we've educated people to the point where they don't need to come anymore. We need to start educating everyone about, here's what it costs for us to run all of these things. Here's the value that we get from it. Maybe some of this is changing. Maybe we don't use this as much as we did 30 years ago, and so there might be, we don't need that as much. Maybe we can invest that money in some other uses someplace else in the community and start to bring people along just as we're thinking about that, so that we're not the only ones sort of out there on the forefront having to say no, as Colleen says, and way ahead of the. Well, no, I mean, as you.
But my point is,
you don't want to get ahead of the public. You want to bring everyone along with you, understanding that, okay, we have limited resources. We're going to have to say no to one of these things.
Judy and then it makes it easier.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, I think that was one of the values of, even though it was messy, the response to the Harley Clark situation, because the public involved themselves in that right away. And what was interesting to me about that conversation was that the public, you didn't have the fragmentation that you normally have of people saying, oh, this is a landmark, I love this house, or I'm an artist, and you had a little bit of that, but pretty much it was the public saying, what's the best use for this, and how much money is it going to cost, and what is the value of parkland to the community. I'm very big on involving the public, but I just found that discussion really, really interesting. It was a much more mature discussion than I would have expected, previously. So I think that's a great place to start, is with the public.
Well, as you like, I could not disagree more with Judy. Actually, I think that the Harley Clark was the epitome of an embarrassing situation with not having proper data, with lies being out there into the public and continually lies about it. So I think it was maybe, again, the most embarrassing thing that this council has done in the 4+ years that I've been on council, and what the public did to a private citizen who was only trying to help us could not have been more wrong.
That's
and
right.
I'm embarrassed for you to say such a thing.
I don't know what the lies were, Colleen. So
You know exactly what they were.
No, I really
but
don't.
Yes, they were. About the beach. Judy made a comment about her love of the process. I'm allowed to say that I think she isn't wrong.
I agree. She's wrong.
So you can defend Judy as you always do, but my point is I'm disagreeing with Judy, and I have the floor, Judy.
I'm asking for clarification.
People are
That's all.
entitled to disagree with you, Judy.
That's fine. I'm just asking for clarification.
And I think Alderman Wynn's point about through the budget process and teaching people, what we did was we didn't teach people, because what we did was we laid people off. And so no programs were cut. Nothing was really cut if people came out and said they didn't want it cut. We fired people, is what we did to budget. We didn't educate anybody, and nobody, we told people about it, but did they come out and say, feel free to cut our programs? No programs were cut. None of that. It's exactly true. And so to say we throw out data all the time, but do we make those hard choices? I don't believe we do, because it's based on emotion. And that's exactly what happened with Harley Clark. That's exactly what happened through the budget process over the last 3.5 years.
Just one comment about process, because process is always messy, and especially when the public's involved, because you will get a wide variety of comments and decisions. One of the things that Mark mentioned was putting together, if you put together a 50-year plan on your facilities, then the next step in that process is setting priorities. What are you going to do first, second, and third? And that helps you with the public discussion, especially if the public has been involved in helping you clarify what they think the priorities are for the community. Because if somebody, you set them 1 through 7, say, and say you're working full-time on priority number 1, and the constituency for number 7 shows up and said, hey, we've got a really good idea for, something new that could happen with this. And you go, oh, well, wait a minute. Here's what we have done, and we are working on number 1. So unless you're bringing us a noodle of money along with your idea for number 7, we're going to have to put this off. Because the other thing about capital projects and planning is they take time, and you can't do them all at once. Even if you had unlimited funds, you don't have unlimited staff, and you cannot contract for, design, go through whatever your environmental review process is, and all of that in a single stage. So you've got to map this out over time and pick your priorities. Once you pick your priorities, then you've got a basis for saying, no, wait, maybe later. Maybe if you come at us with more money, we can take a look at it. So, and that might help with the emotional side of your discussions. So the priority setting will be a huge part of this once you have your data collected. So in terms of an objective, let me try and craft one for you. You've got a number of items up here that could be used as criteria for your capital plan. Knowing what the numbers of users are, what for the study for your capital plan, I'm sorry. So the number of users, the type of demography, the amount of revenue generated, its useful life, the cost to operate, value to the community, and I think you could do some more definition work around what's the non-monetary related value to the community of various sorts of facilities, and how you might want to rate that. And what else is out there, and best practices, things like that. Those are all criteria that you can include in your inventory study. Get all of your facilities together, identify what these criteria are that are most important to you, or the staff feels that they have the information that they can extract, and get it to you readily, and have you take a look at it, and then start working your way through the facilities. But a goal for, an objective for next year could be that you're going to ask staff to complete a facilities inventory based on, and Wally's going to have to kick me in the kneecap if I'm overstepping my bounds, based on as many of these criteria as can be, as many of these as qualify as criteria. Some of them are comments. And for the 2014 budget process, and the reason you're doing this is because you want to develop a longer-term capital plan.
So I think our challenge for 14, though, is what do we need to do in the interim? And how much can we put toward these studies, but how much do we need to address some critical needs moving forward? And that's why I think what you saw on the slide that the Public Works put up was our best guess at that. We can continue to whittle away at that. And so if we don't have a large capital plan for 14, that's okay. We'll save that money for a future year. Would that be consistent? I think that's consistent from what I'm hearing.
What are the critical needs you're saying? I'm going back to what.
Well, we had.
We've got 16 projects
Yes.
for 2014 that were designed to they're basically stopgap measures, things that you're going to have to do to keep the buildings operating.
It was the slide 9 in
page
the
page
Public
five.
Works presentation.
Page 5, yeah.
Page 5. And so, and this discussion this evening even informs a revision of this, because that's at $4.5 million. You know, and included in that was a study looking at Fleetwood Jourdain, looking at Chandler Newberger. You know, some of the things are in process, which I think the council's already agreed to, the Lakefront Lagoon renovations, for example. And then there are some, you know, middle ground issues, the Church Street boat ramp repairs, which we've talked a little bit about, the Ecology Center addition, the enhancement to the classroom area there, which the council's talking a little bit about, the Fire Station 2 remodeling. So there's some middle ground projects in there as well, which we would think would make sense. And one of the things we'd like to do on October 26th is show you many of these things so that you can make your own independent judgment as to the criticality. And maybe you'll decide that, yeah, it's important, but perhaps we need to finish this process that we're talking about this evening before moving forward, and that would then pare down that list even further. So that's the hope, I think, for the 26th, is for you to understand some of the more specific issues regarding what's on this list and then make a judgment. Is it that critical, or should we put it off another year pending some of these other discussions?
So what are your thoughts about what Wally said?
I agree with him.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And I think we may peel back. I mean, the animal shelter roof, for example. There are larger issues regarding the animal shelter, larger issues regarding CARE. That's another organization with a $1 a year lease that has recently expired. So I think there are larger policy questions there in addition to a roof. So, you know, perhaps that gets put aside moving forward. So we can go back and look at that list. The Salt Dome, again, we've been talking about the Salt Dome for a number of years. I think the council's made some policy decisions to replace the Salt Dome as is. The reason we didn't do it a year ago is because we had a full Salt Dome because we didn't use all the salt we bought. This year, Suzette, the Salt Dome is just about empty. Yes. So we now have the ability to move forward with that project. So we'll show all that on the 26th and
I think we should clarify the issue with care and the animal shelter. The animal shelter is operated by police department. People are in the animal shelter, so renting $1 a year to care is very different than renting something that is operated completely by a not-for-profit entity. I mean, care, no matter how you feel about them, services our efforts in terms of animal control. And so we don't really lease the building to care.
But they're a partner in the operation.
They're more or less a partner, yes.
And
But
those are
it's not their building.
Those are very good discussions about what's the value of a nonprofit providing in terms of quality of life for your community. And so how you structure your financial arrangement, you ought to have some criteria for how you look at things like that. A for-profit entity or a group of people who have exclusive use of a public facility ought to be charged differently than a nonprofit that's providing services across the board to the community. So, but those are criteria that you're going to have to develop when it comes to that segment of the discussion. So
I just need some clarification.
Yes.
On the proposed facilities project for 2014 Wally, we have a proposed budget of 4.5. How much do we actually have? Because do we have that? I mean, that's the proposed budget. But how many dollars will we actually have? Because I think that has to play into how we will begin to set priorities in terms of what we're going to do.
Well, this list currently, as it is listed, we would be asking the council for $2.2 million in general obligation bonds.
Okay.
So there's a carryover, depending on the projects, of about $1 million, and then other sources, $1.2 million. The $900,000 is from the state for the Arrington Lagoon. The Sturge Street boat ramp, I think, is also some state money. So the 2.2, that first column, would be the city's share, so to speak. But most of, or at least some of that $1,038,000 is also carryover general obligation.
So we already have those.
That's money we've already have one way or another.
All right.
But it's the $2.2 million, which is new money.
New money.
Would be new money for 14.
Okay.
And the big discussion will be where you get more money.
Right.
Out of your budget, out of your operations, out of your borrowing, all of the kinds of options you may have. And one of the questions I'll ask you at some point in the future is how are you going to look at the balance between your operating budget and your capital budget? And Marty, could you just in round numbers talk a little bit about the overall budget, what percent of all of that is spent on operations, what percent is spent on capital right now?
So for our general operating fund, we're at about 86, 87 million for operations that are not funded by a specific source. So for instance, the utilities department fee for service. So you compare that with the bonds being issued from the same pots of money, meaning property taxes and things of that nature. So we're looking at $30 million in new projects, of which about 12 million or so are competing with the same property tax dollar, meaning prior year bond issue or new year bond issue that isn't being paid from any other source than new property taxes. So we certainly have other money from TIF funds or from economic development, or but those are, I guess I'd still say, are not the ones competing for the same tax dollar, whether it's a sales tax dollar or a utility tax dollar. So it's our operations and our capital in line was the statement I made to Shane earlier today was we did the 86 million we have now, 87 million is still fairly constant to where it was 5 years ago. And we haven't grown, the operations haven't grown, it's just neither has our capital. So we're still in the same boat that we were 5 years ago as far as.
Well, but the biggest difference is our capital debt and our pension debt. And so, without getting too far afield, I mean, one of the reasons we've not been able to invest more in capital, have operations grow even if we wanted to, is that those costs continue to rise. And the general fund is paying for those costs. If our pension costs, what, in round numbers, have increased over the last 10 years by how much?
$6 million in the last 10 years?
Yeah.
More than $7-8 million. I think that the other metric is, because it came up in the actuarial study, if we weren't doing the payback, the actual normal cost for our pensions is about $6.5-7 million. The payback is $8 to $9 million. Now, if that payback was actually then just put into capital, we would have a much different picture. But that's another debt that we're paying back from previous years.
So your three components going forward are debt and the ratio of operations to capital. And so no decisions tonight, but just know that at some point in time, I or someone else will ask you the question. Once you figure out what your capital asset inventory is and what's important to you and what isn't, how are you going to pay for it? And so another thing that you could put as an objective, and I don't know if it's good for 2014 or not, but a future objective might be, can you ask staff to take a look at your finances? And they do it as part of the budget process too, but that's a year-to-year thing. But if you were to look out 10 years from now, for instance, is there any way that you could ask staff to look at some potential strategies for how you could free up some more money to spend on capital? And that might mean restructuring operations. It might mean paying down debt so that you've got an increment there that could go toward capital infrastructure. So that may not be a good objective for 2014, because I think you really need to know what your facilities are first before you go into those kinds of questions. But you've got to start at some point in time, and at some point you're going to have to ask yourself that question. Yes, Ann.
Well, we can't do any of this with our current revenue. We have to expand the sources of revenue. When you look at our tax bill, the percentage of that bill that we are paying as individual property taxpayers is primarily pension and debt. Pension and debt. That's used to be years ago that, like 75% of the tax bill went to the general fund for operations. That does not happen anymore. We have to expand our tax base, period. I mean, absolutely essential that we do that. We're going to have to start looking at new revenue sources, for example, new fines, new fees, new service charges, because there is a limit to what you can impose on the taxpayer.
Yeah.
People make a choice to pay a fine, to get a traffic ticket, whatever. So those are the areas I think we're going to have to start looking at. I mean, I know from people I talk to, they can no longer afford the taxes on their house, and something has to be done. So I think, we just can't keep increasing that.
Well, we have to look beyond fines and fees as well.
Well, I'm just using that as an example of new revenue sources.
But I'm just saying that we have to expand our minds.
I don't want to see on Evanston now Ann Rainey wants more fines and fees. I mean, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying among all the revenue sources,
it's already posted, Ann.
Those are just two things. Those are just two minor things. But we have to look at new sources. We have to get more economic development. We have to start looking at not taking things off the tax rolls not allowing not-for-profits to not make a commitment to paying something. And I'm not talking about going back to those that are already here. I'm talking about starting now. We have to get serious.
Absolutely.
Okay. Time out on discussion. Objective. So does the objective that I described earlier about in 2014 asking staff to do,
Right, yes.
develop all that, does that work for you? And Wally, does that work for you?
Well, I think we just need to come back to you with what we understand each of these points to mean, and how they're measurable, or how we would measure them, just to make sure you're okay, because some of them are easier to measure than others.
Yes, and some of them are going to be easier to gather than others.
Sure.
So does that make sense? Does that work?
Absolutely.
Okay. What about the question of asking staff to look at future monetary changes in your budget and your revenues and finance? What could happen? Do you
Why
want
don't
to
we
do
save that
more
for the
later?
next meeting?
Okay.
Because again, when we meet again, we're going to talk about financial policies, economic development, and social services.
Okay. We'll
So,
solve that one.
but what I guess I'm also thinking about, facilities include parks. So we would have that be that. We've talked briefly about trees, and so where does trees fit into all this? My take on the budget right now is to find as much one-time money as I can to replace trees, because I think we certainly, the one thing we heard when we did the community outreach on the budget, about pretty much everyone we talked to was concerned about what's going on with trees. So, we're prepared to do that. I don't know if the council wants to do more than that, or just trusts me to try to come up with as much money as I reasonably can. And there's also limits to how much we can actually do in the 2 planting seasons, in the spring and fall.
And
so,
don't forget, people contributed money.
and people did contribute money.
That was fabulous.
And we're committed to continue those things, the tree keeper movement, to have people maintain the trees that we've just planted. So if that makes sense for everyone, then we'll continue doing that, and that'll
Do
be
you
part.
think we could get the facilities keeper movement?
Well, I mean, and maybe that should be another thing as part of the evaluation is, what kind of partner help could there be? I met with the recreation managers and supervisors today, and they complained about the collection of batteries at the community centers, is that they don't have the time to know when the bins are full, and then they get too full, and they're difficult to move because they're too full. Well, could there be somebody who could go to our community centers and manage that, who would manage recycling and waste? And so that's more programmatic, but I mean, maybe there's the same thing with facilities. I mean, we've had people help with gardening around this building. I don't know that that's happening actively anymore. So.
We've had people contribute trees to the parks and maintain.
Yeah. But I mean, I think to keep up with tree
Somebody at Greener Evanston.
campaign would be.
I'm sorry?
Somebody at Greener Evanston.
Right, Citizens for Greener Evanston.
Yeah, maybe I take it on.
And then we've also talked a little bit about sidewalks, and I think there's a larger discussion for sidewalks, but is there interest for 14 doing something a little different in order to invest more?
Not increasing our share. That makes no sense.
So keep it 50-50, but spend more money, spend the same amount of money and go 60-40. What makes sense?
Don't increase our share.
Don't increase the city share?
Yeah. We have a longer list. We can never get through. We have plenty of people that participate.
Can't hear you.
We have plenty of people that are participating at 50-50.
Can't keep up with it.
That's right.
We can't keep up
with the amount of money that we have budgeted. So I think that.
Wait, I'm confused.
The amount of money.
We can't spend the money that we have.
No, we're spending the money. We have a remaining list every year.
More demand than.
Yes, more demand than money.
Well, okay, the cost benefit analysis of this is, what are the lawsuits like? I mean, I don't know whether all of you received the email I received.
We don't have the money now to do it. If we increase our share, we'll have even less sidewalks done. That is exactly what you said.
I'm not, all I'm saying is that, to me, the thought process is, how much do we end up spending in lawsuits on this? Because We're getting more of them.
I don't think we are.
I think we can increase the amount that we invest in sidewalks without changing the sharing of costs.
Yeah,
We can do that. We can take.
So
it
invest
from
more
first.
money, but leave the sharing the same.
Same.
Okay, thank you.
So, very good, we set an objective without any assistance from you.
While you were shifting papers around, we go right to streets now.
So, and the objective that you set was?
But not change the
sidewalks.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ann. I completely understood, so I'm not misunderstood you. I thought, I'm happy to increase the pot. and-
Increase the pop and not increase the ratio.
Change the sharing, yeah.
Change the
Never
sharing.
mind.
That's it. That we were talking about.
And then I think on water and wastewater utilities, it looks like we're gonna end with streets. That we've talked,
We're gonna get to water.
What did you say?
no, we're gonna end with streets. So let's talk about water and wastewater. Are you all satisfied with what you heard on the progress we're making, or do you want to make additional progress? And if so, how do we pay for it?
You mean at our meeting we had a week or so ago?
Well, we've been talking about water kind of serially over the last while.
Well, and I think that what we need is to have Dave Steinbeck tell us what needs the water facility has in order to be able to sell water to all these other communities. For example, yes, that's right, Ann. All right. But which ones, like the reservoir, do you need that? It sounds to me pretty dicey to be trying to sell to other communities
And not have the storage.
and not have the reservoir.
So that sounds like that's an objective.
So I would like to know, I would like to have Dave tell us what the priorities are so that he can have a credible water sales program, and when the date is by which time he needs these things in place, because the whole water sales is a 5-year thing.
Sure.
So
And it meets all the criteria, I think, that you've been talking about this evening as far as cost benefit and long-range plans and bringing money.
that's what I would like from water.
Okay. Madam Mayor, members of the council, I think that sounds like a fine objective, and so we can fashion that as an objective on water. I think sewer, we've made good investments, and we'll just continue on with the distribution system as we've discussed.
And so the sewer system, it sounded like you're starting to pay down your debt on.
We actually have a plan.
The major work that you did, and so that was very good. And so then the question is, does that give you more to reinvest, and at what point in time?
Well, and it allows us to reinvest in water, because it's all the same bill. And so staff's recommendation has been, as we pay down the sewer debt, we don't refund money or make costs less. We simply shift those costs or those dollars to paying off water debt.
We just think, yeah, and the big question is when the residents see a reduction.
And that's a good objective too. So if you have an opportunity to continue to pay down debt on your water and your wastewater enterprises, that one good strategy is to, you started it and keep doing it. Is you reduced your debt on sewer and you're using the increment to further reduce debt on water. So, and that's a good thing. So, okay, is that it on water and wastewater? Okay, streets and sidewalks. And you had an excellent presentation this evening covering this, and your water wastewater was also excellent. And you're very fortunate that you have people who care as much about all this stuff. It's a wonderful asset. And talk about value added to your community, that you have people that can present and explain information about your underlying systems as well as you heard tonight. So, on the city streets objectives, just a couple of questions. Did the inventory and payment index tell you anything you didn't know already? And how would you like to use that information? Is it too much about individual street segments or the street system? And then taking a look at balancing the maintenance, repair, replacement schedule citywide and by ward, I thought some of the more interesting elements of Suzette's presentation were how money had been allocated and on what basis. What were the criteria that city staff is using to allocate the limited resources that we have already? And does that make sense? Would you like any change to that? Do you think that makes, is there anything else that you'd add or take away? Don?
Well, unfortunately, looking at the condition charts, the idea of equally distributing between wards doesn't seem to be panning out very well, because you've got one ward with 44% of the streets with below 40% condition, and that's frankly a horrifying result. So, to me, the primary factor should be, where's our list of factors here? Utility priority, obviously that's relevant. Same thing with grant and tip priority, but surface conditions should be up there at the top, maybe right below utility priority, or some circumstances above. So I think we should look at this more holistically, like we look at with the street, with the sewers and the water mains. You know, this is an entire system, and you know, just have an approach that's more in line with that.
So what would happen if we just 1 year, it's a 1 year thing, and just really did all of the streets that were very poor?
What it
And I don't care what ward.
No matter where they are.
No matter where they are.
I think we should have a goal to have no streets below 40%.
That would be
I
fine.
think you're
Trying to get to that point.
great.
And then we can just kind of
I
focus
actually
on that
thought
40
that
or
way,
49.
that we were doing the worst no matter where they were.
Well, not if they're trying to get some ward equity in there. I can understand how that would mess it up. And
I don't mind
maybe
it.
they would all, that year they'd all be in one ward, and so what?
Fine.
Do we need ward equity as a criteria?
I don't know that we need ward equity as a
All of them
criteria.
very
But then I guess my question would be, at what percentage would you divide the pot? I mean, would you go 100% based on ward, or would it look like a
No.
70-30
No,
split?
it would be 100% based on surface
Condition.
conditions.
Okay, it's based on the service.
Yes.
Yeah.
As Don said, is if it's all one big system, and we are all users of the system.
Right.
Yeah. The worst road should get done first.
Yes.
What's a reasonable time period to get there? Is it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years?
Well,
That no
dollars.
We don't have cost.
I think we had a general sense of dollars, but
So you keep
How much was it?
I guess I'd like to see a proposal.
4 million for very poor.
To eliminate
Yeah.
the very poor category.
Eliminate the very poor was $4 million. And that,
Both primary and local.
That's below
yes,
40?
for primary and local.
And that's below 40?
Yep.
Yes, that's the very poor. Below 40.
And we spend
Internally
3.2 annually,
It's really
right?
about 4
Right.
point,
So we could do it in 2 years.
about 4.1.
That's
Right.
Yeah.
But keep in mind that, once again, everything doesn't stay the
Right.
same. So
Right.
2 years from now, some of the poor may be in the very poor category.
That's true.
So
But
that's,
if you committed to saying, as of this year, to eliminate everything that is in that category this year, understanding that 2 years from now, some
May change.
may have fallen into that category. But it would still be a smaller amount. than-
And actually for the 2014, we'd be finishing up a couple projects that didn't get completed last year anyway.
It's Anne's turn.
I think it's not so simple. I mean, I'm not an expert at this, but it's not so simple as just going in and paving all the over 40% streets, because there's water and sewer issues, and we have to keep coordinating with water and sewer. I mean, if
But that's
there's
a top
no issue
priority.
with
That's a
that,
top priority.
but I mean, we're talking about only the streets. We can't talk about them in a vacuum, the bad streets. So if water and sewer has to be replaced, we have to consider that expense too.
But wouldn't that be, as the utilities is a top priority, that would be in consideration of the streets that have the poor and I think Don's right, that the surface condition should be number 2 under that, and then you would be analyzing both of them at the same time, so you would know then
Just
what.
saying, it's
Yeah,
not
right?
just it's a bad
Right.
street, let's pave it.
No,
No.
it's, and Suzette always brings that up, that we, we're not gonna do this street if we know that a year and 2 years from now, the utility line is gonna
That's
come
all,
through.
that's all I
Right,
mentioned.
right, yeah.
So what I heard Dolores suggest is utilities first and then street condition?
And that's what we do,
That's what
but,
we do.
but I just wanted to point out that there's utilities flexibility. Speaking for Dave, he has a priority list, and his priority list, and then he has flexibility. So there are things that absolutely have to get done, and then he's more flexible with some of those other streets. So we really do work cooperatively to get the worst streets that perhaps are not very high priority water mains, so that I can say, well, this is a really poor street for us, can we do this? And then he will go and say, okay, that may be 3 years out for him, and he will go through and replace the water main on that street, because it's not, is that safe? So it's a very
That's what I thought.
cooperative
Effort.
What Dawn suggested was, in how long, 2 years, you want to get to no streets below 40?
Right, I mean, I'd like to see what the proposal looks like, and again, coordinated with the utilities department. And I realize there'll be some that have to wait, it's not the perfect system, but.
There are going to be fluctuations based on things you can't control, and so.
Right, but they have that target.
But those two criteria, utilities first and then street index, that's your objective side, but that's your goal. And the other thing that you could do is this could be like a 2-year pilot project for you, and you can take a look and see what happens in terms of the ratios of you'll still keep track of how many streets get done for the board. Take a look and see how different it is from what your strategy is now, and then see if that's a problem for you. So there's no difficulty in trying something like this. This is at least I don't think so. And from the staff standpoint, is that a problem?
It'd be difficult to try to implement it in 2014. We're already. We couldn't switch what's already been approved to.
No, right, I'm saying the next 2 years.
Start 2015 and then plan, okay.
Right.
Oh, it was, being able to go by surface conditions certainly, I think it was overall proof.
But let us scrub the list one last time and see if there aren't some segments that would cause utility issues that we could do for it. May not be a lot. We'll commit to at least do it. Take a look.
Yes. Well, we started surveying, that's why. Because that's why we asked ahead of time to.
We'll take one more line.
Well, I have the ratings for what we're doing in 2014, and I will share those with the individual audience.
Okay, so 2014 street ratings would be the basis for going forward.
Yes, for the streets that we already selected for 2014, I have the ratings for those, and I will share that with everyone, and we can see what you want to do.
Okay, so 2014 is set, so in terms of an objective then, starting in 2015, we'd like to try and achieve this goal of having no streets below 40.
Right. That's a good goal.
That's
a good goal.
And try it as like a 2-year pilot project and see what the differences are from what you're doing now.
See if we realize some economies.
You could potentially.
Did you see this report?
Doing a 2-year program versus a 1-year program may give you some economies, as Gail may know. So, okay, that's streets. What about sidewalks, street trees, paths of travel? Any goals you want to try and any objectives you want to try and tackle there?
I think safety issues regarding sidewalks is what
Yeah.
concerns me.
Yeah.
I
agree. When we talked about that before.
Yeah.
Okay, talk a little bit more about what an objective would be. So, is it an evaluation first, and then?
Well, we have the multimodal transportation.
2008, I think.
But I think as far as creating new sidewalks.
There's not a sidewalk.
It's not.
There isn't? Okay.
It might be the beginnings of one.
I guess
Well,
not.
no, I mean, we know where they are.
We know when we
There's not an not like the street evaluation.
We know when we don't see them.
Yes.
But I think it's, you know, it's certainly evaluating the areas around schools or areas accessing business area, you know, business districts. The things that are heavily traveled and really have no excuse for.
And where we get the most students from.
Yeah. I mean, what gets the
That
most?
should be the first criteria.
Yes.
Right.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, sure.
Safe routes to school.
I mean, we've improved things enormously in the downtown just by making it so that.
Is the letter you got from the runner
Yeah,
in the park? Yeah.
I know, yeah, right over on Sheridan Road.
So I heard you say high priority and safety of sidewalks, that a sidewalk inventory, you know where they are, but you don't really have an inventory. So knowing what you have and what you don't have is that's a good objective to obtain. And then if you're going to replace or improve sidewalks, these are some criteria that you might use. The ones around schools, commercial areas, safe routes to schools. Did I miss anything?
Well, also the these are
Around
crosswalks.
Senior citizens.
Senior.
Yeah,
The seniors.
yeah,
And
Senior buildings.
right. Anywhere near a senior living.
I think we ought to inventory all the sidewalks that are disrupted by tree roots.
Yeah, well, it's the
By
same,
city
yeah,
trees.
everything where a sidewalk isn't as it should be. That means if
But
it's been
those we
disrupted
can
by,
pay for ourselves.
right, because they're just as much a tripping hazard as the crumpled ones.
But the non-existence of sidewalks is a deterrent to crosswalks. We're working on 2 projects now. The 6th ward that at city parks, and there are 2 city parks that have no crosswalk access, and the problem is there's no sidewalk on the city park side. So
Well, the city park ought to put in a sidewalk. Is it in? And
Cartwright
other-
Park has no sidewalks,
Put it in.
and Loveless Park is, I mean, that'd be.
Are there going to be some places that you determine where sidewalks are not appropriate?
Sure.
Okay. And so it's not you're not going to pave the city every street segment of the city for sidewalks. So there are places.
There's the safety criteria, I think, is a good one.
Okay.
Ownership is the key to it. Or sometimes we don't own the right of way.
That's
So
right.
that's the key. Sometimes some of the sidewalks don't exist because we don't own them.
Then there's legal costs.
And the asphalt patching of the sidewalks is also a hazard.
Yes. We don't do that anymore, do we?
Yeah, we
Yeah. That is worse than it gets.
No, rephrase that. We only do it in the wintertime. We are not doing
Okay,
it
yeah, I didn't think
anymore,
so.
other than
That's
when
what
that's
I
our
thought.
only option. in
That's
the
what I
wintertime.
thought.
But there's a lot of it
There's
out
some
there that's
remaining.
dangerous.
They're
And
old.
people,
Yeah, they've been around for a while.
That's
Talk
very
about
good.
trees?
You guys did well. Okay, trees.
Trees, I have trees.
Okay.
How about we maintain the status quo on trees? I think we're doing a good job. We do a great job, and the job we're doing really was developed with the help of the community. So I think what we're doing with trees, we ought to keep doing and not alter.
Maintain existing tree stock?
Tree what?
Tree stock?
No, because we add trees
Because
every
there's
year.
thousands of
No,
trees
just
dying.
maintain the process and the strategy that we have for dealing with our public trees.
And I think we're getting so much feedback now, only because of the ash borer thing, because, I mean, the trees are dying.
And there's,
And
and
people
everybody
say stop
knows.
streets, so they don't like it.
Okay, and
I'm just not adding anything.
Just to be clear, so are you talking about the maintenance component of
The
the existing
maintenance,
trees?
the new trees, the treatment of trees, all of the strategies that we have in place right now.
What happens when those strategies are not working for us?
Well, so far they are, right?
Well, I mean, the emerald ash borer is killing
Well,
thousands.
but we're taking down those trees. Everybody across the country is.
Right, so the question is, how quickly are we replanting?
Right.
Well, replanting is what the issue is.
I think that's part of what the strategy is with the tree keepers thing. And also, in commercial areas, and by that I mean even hospitals, et cetera, like St. Francis, replaced all the parkway trees that were destroyed by the ash borer. I think we ought to promote that, but that's what we do.
Later than done.
Mark, can you remind me what our total spend annually is on trees, all in?
All in all, on tree replacement, we had about, it was under $100,000 for spring and fall plantings this year. We cut that back over the past 2 to 3 years, so this year's budget proposes a little bit of an increase back up to historical levels. And by that, only in the last 4 to 5 years, those levels. It's still, tree planting is still under $150,000 spring and fall combined.
But our total spend, like, is it about $3 million or something?
But then you've got to add in the treatment and all of that.
Oh, sure, if you add in our forestry for maintenance.
And from a staff perspective, we're not looking to add more maintenance. But, as trees are dying and we're taking them down, there's an expectation of the community that it not be 5, 6, 7 years before the tree is replaced.
But that's,
So we're trying to make it faster.
So that figure again, Marty, I'm sorry.
There's always something about trees.
Well, I would rather give that back to the groups as a deliverable, because it's the 18 folks in forestry plus it varies from year to year depending on how much we're doing on elm inoculations. It can vary by $600,000 if we're in that cycle. And this coming year, we're going to be in.
Yeah, it's about 800,000.
Well, the variance is 600,000. The total is 800,000.
We just paid for the serum or whatever you call it.
Well, that was 2 years ago.
We just paid for.
Yeah, no, we did. There was something out of the bills list just
Yes, we did.
in the last 2 months.
You did.
That's
The annual, that's what it comes
No, we have an every 3-year treatment that is about $800,000. Every 3 years, we go and do an inoculation program for duck.
No, but we're inoculating trees this year too. We just paid.
Yeah. There's annual maintenance.
Yes.
There's annual maintenance, and then there's a 3-year inoculation process.
Well, you can call it maintenance, but it is inoculation. We just paid for it. Yeah, it is. Why did you just pay for it?
I just want to put the figure.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. I know. I just
We're
all over the place.
Okay, one at a time. Did Dawn and Peter, did you both have your say?
We still don't have a big number.
Well,
That's
maybe
all.
they can't come up with it right off the top of their head. Let's get it.
Perhaps when the tree's cut down, you get the notification, the homeowner can be invited to pay for the new tree, like you can get them the costs. I'd pay for the new tree. I just lost 2 trees.
Well, they are.
I didn't get a notice that, here's how much the tree will be and invite them.
No, generally they do.
You do.
Because I've had people who've had the ash tree come down and tell me, I paid, I can hardly wait.
But how did they find out? That's what Don was saying.
The city notified them.
Yeah.
When the tree's cut down?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're probably going to get a free one because you're old.
It doesn't work that way.
But you know what, maybe following up on that, Don, it might be a good
let's make
idea
sure we
to
do
run
that.
a program, to run some kind of ad campaign,
Well, this is part
really
of our-
inviting.
Well, we've had an
residents.
intern working since this spring. Helping do that. She's the one who raised the money, has been putting on the programs, and so we're trying to sort through what makes the most sense. And both Suzette and Dave are working together to see if they can share one full-time person. I guess Catherine's now looking at an AmeriCorps volunteer where we can pay a relatively small amount of money to get someone through that program for a year to do both water conservation and tree work together.
Mayor, this might be too detailed.
Hello, guys. We're losing it. We've got 10 more minutes.
Okay, this might be too detailed, and maybe I should just get this question later. But I know Chicago is using some kind of treatment on their ashes, and we are not.
Yes.
And I have some members of my community in the ward who have heard about this, and they are banding together and treating the ash trees on their block. And could we just get a little bit more information about whether that actually works or not.
Melissa, we had a report from Paul on that.
I know, but now, Paul has signed off on letting some citizens use the stuff.
He said there is some effectiveness.
Right.
And we're reevaluating it based on, trees of significance.
Right.
So, but we
There's a
could,
cost benefit analysis to that too. The cost of the inoculation and how much additional light as opposed
The
to
tree.
removing the tree. It's a variety of,
Right.
of
Yeah.
factors associated with that.
And you are not adding more trees to your stock, you're maintaining your tree stock currently and replacing
Simply
that which
replacing.
that's okay.
parts.
Wish we could add.
We were adding, before the emerald ash arrived, we were actually adding to our tree stock for a period of time.
We
But
no
then-
longer are.
No, yeah, because
Okay.
the emerald ash is subtracting them so much faster.
Okay, so, and is that an acceptable policy? That's an acceptable objective to maintain, that you will not add to your tree stock, which adds to your maintenance and operation costs. So you will maintain the stock that you have?
But Mark just pointed out that there's a new disease.
There's a new blight called
Red oak.
called bacterial leaf scorch, and it affects red oaks. And those have been some of the replacement trees we put on the parkways for many years. And I know Paul D'Agostino is very aware of this, and we've quit planting that species. But it's going to mean a lot of the parkway trees that we've planted are going to die.
Well, that's what the ash trees were. They were the replacement for the elms.
Right. Is there any situation that you can imagine where you take trees out and don't replace them?
No.
Okay. All right. Just thought I'd ask.
We have our Tree City flag sitting right behind the mayor. So.
Perkins Woods.
Okay.
It's all natural.
Other area, I think.
One day we'll wait on God.
I think there's an objective that can be crafted out of trees. There's one other thing I wanted to ask you about relative to streets, and that is, or at least comment on it, and we talked amongst individually, some of you about this, and Wally mentioned it in his opening comments about streets get used for a lot of things, and they're not just for cars driving up and down. It's your streets serve as a conduit for your storm drain system and your underground utilities, your drainage systems, general drainage systems, the sidewalks, the street trees, paths of travel for school, the sidewalks, and gaps are noticeable, and those things are it's not consistent. You don't have a grid street system that's all laid out in ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, and so you've got a lot of variety. And then your streets also get used for things like street fairs and runs and races and things like that. Bicycles, pedestrians, and one of the things about streets is any change that you make, it takes a while for people to accommodate that change. So if you put in a bike path, how long does it take them to figure out how to use it properly? You would make it make sense, but
We don't know yet.
not necessarily always the case. And should a street in your community be all things to all people? So is it appropriate to have dedicated bike lanes on every street? Is it appropriate? How are you handling the curb cuts and the ADA? Is all of that necessary, appropriate? What about the street closures? Is every street eligible for closure?
No.
Are there streets that really don't make sense, and you could craft a goal around identifying, inventorying the streets that you don't want ever to be closed for whatever reason? And how you handle, are some of these events annual? Are they spontaneous? Do you have criteria for deciding whether a particular event is appropriate for a street closure? So thinking about how your streets, you may not want to try and craft an objective around it, but it's worth talking about, because you can't always ride a bike down streets that can't be, for whatever reason right now, well maintained, or You know, some streets, people just walking in them, it's a trip hazard, trip and fall, much worse than your sidewalks. So, and some people like streets in poor condition because it causes cars to slow down. And I don't know if you've heard that argument. I've heard it in every community I've worked in. And so are there any objectives that you would like to consider crafting around? Are streets everything to everybody? Are there some uses that should not occur on some streets? If so, can criteria be adapted for those? Is that too much at 9:59? Probably so.
Well, why don't we take a crack at it and see what we come up with?
Well, I think closing down streets for whether they're community organized or just neighborhood block parties is one of the biggest and expensive things we can do that people enjoy.
Right.
Why not encourage it and do more if we can?
Do more.
If it's people want it.
Yeah. And I think Wally had a very good point. You know, your streets and your sidewalks are gathering places too. So you've got your grassy areas, your parklands, things like that. People gather there for certain kinds of things, sometimes organized, sometimes not, and active and passive. And you have the same with your streets and sidewalks. And so is it okay that they're gathering places, and under what conditions?
Even our parking garage is a gathering place.
Well, that's a bit scary.
There.
Block party for
Yes.
well, that's good.
Sometimes it's good to
That's very
exclude cars.
creative, yeah. So, Wally has offered staff to try and craft something around that for you to look at in terms of an objective. Is it something that you'd like them to tackle in 2014? That's my next one. Or is it something Wally would feel could be tackled in 2014?
Let us work on it.
Do we all have
Yeah.
policy?
Okay.
We have a policy like
Okay, you guys absorbed a lot of information tonight, and you gave a lot of information.
So as Madam Mayor, members of the council, one question before we break up. So as we prepare for the next one of these, again, it'll be economic development, financial policies, and our social services approach. Would you prefer less of an upfront presentation and more time to talk? Or you thought upfront presentation was better? Okay. Well, we'll work on upfront.
stay focused on.
I was going to suggest, getting the materials ahead of time is helpful, so I think, if we could just all read them and have less actual time reviewing the stuff we've already read.
Maybe just a review of them, if we got them ahead of time.
And the PowerPoint's okay, I mean, we didn't do any staff.
If you could
report.
just make the numbers a little bit bigger on some of them. I mean, because I like the pie charts a lot, but if you could just make the numbers a little bit better.
It was hard to see exactly what it was.
Thank you.
It's a minor thing.
So you need a 6
So when is the